just the criminal ones, like even the medical exceptions, you have to get multiple doctors' approvals. And that's assuming those multiple doctors are willing to go up to judges and say, this is medically necessary, at risk of being charged with, in my state, a second-degree felony and getting their medical license taken away. Like, these exceptions are not exceptions. They will not happen very often, if at all.
And the electorate for the Republican Party who will concede on certain, exceptions, they're not voting for people who are honest or even talk about having exceptions. They're just continuing to vote for people who are like, no exceptions, because that's all they have on their party. And they don't care about the material consequences. And I mean, Smight, you could probably give a better historical lens for this, what with the Southern strategy and everything. Lee Atwater very famously in those tapes talked about how, when we talk about like forced busing or gutting welfare, we'd recognize that the people who are going to be most affected by this are Black Americans, people of color, whatever. And that is definitely what they recognize. But it's also a part of this great replacement bullshit that we're starting to see more and more openly within right-wing media, that they're like, we are seeing demographic replacement. Obviously that's not true. Consensual fucking is not replacement, but it is two sides of the same fascist coin. They want to see white birth rates go up, and they recognize that if they remove any kind of ability to get reproductive health care, they're going to see people who have the money to afford the kids. We're going to see demographics increase, and the people who are going to die or suffer the worst elements of poverty are going to die out. That is the whole idea.
Well, historically speaking, I would say that while the party, obviously the party switch in the mid 20th century occurred, the strategies by which racists and I would argue like authoritarians in the United States has really not changed. Following the Civil War, and following like the initial black codes and things like that, a lot of the Jim Crow stuff didn't even mention race necessarily, but they used language that solely affected Black people, right, living in the South. A lot of it did focus on race. I'm not or did specifically mention race, but a lot of the laws, especially where they knew that they were going to run into legal trouble, they would use language that was ambiguous, but it really wasn't. The same thing with redlining as well. Once redlining was deemed unconstitutional and that whole system ended, it really didn't. Banks, mortgage companies, lenders still operated with the essential outcomes of redlining without using the specific verbiage. The drug war obviously targeted at Black and brown minorities in this country. It is a long string of events of trying to disenfranchise people under the guise of neutrality, right? And what bothers me the most is the ahistorical type of rhetoric that I hear coming out of the right discussing either this issue or basically any issue that they bring up. But the argument that abortion does not have a historical importance on this country, or this country doesn't have a historical tie to abortion, is it is ahistorical. That is absolutely not true. Abortions were practiced all around the country for many, many years, up until about the mid 19th century. It was publicly acceptable to seek an abortion, whether through some kinds of medicine, herbs, or some kind of physical, let's say surgery, quote unquote. And that was fine up until what they called the quickening, which is when the fetus would start to move and you could feel the kick, essentially.
I'm so glad someone else mentioned that, because I brought that up the last time we talked about abortion.
Oh yeah. It's something that they like to overlook. But the rise of women's rights movements in this country is paralleled by the rise of physicians groups and also reactionaries to that movement. The American Medical Association was first founded, right, just like I think it's 2 or 3 years before the Seneca Falls rally. Direct response to the rise of women's rights growing in this country. Not to mention that our entire system of gynecological research is based on slave women, poor women who were experimented on, had abortions performed on them with no problem, all at the benefit of wealthy white women. This country has an absolute historical tie to abortion. It's just not one that people want to think about. And I guess shit sucks to suck. It's in the words of Republicans, right? You can't erase it, but you can certainly try if you're Clarence fucking Thomas, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm seeing the ahistorical shit happen on the right so much right now. I saw some insane, I don't know what kind of Daily Wire panel was happening, but Candace Owens, while wearing what I could only describe as curtains, was talking about how abortion is essentially just slavery by another name. It's like, dude, shut the fuck up.
What the
Unwanted pregnancy is literally a war crime. Forced pregnancy.
Dude, they were saying that France has almost as restrictive of abortion laws as we do with this ruling, which is ridiculous. Michael Knowles, and I didn't even fact check any of this because everything that comes out of Daily Wire is bullshit. But he's like, France has a 14-week barrier to getting an abortion. And he's saying like, oh, well, the Mississippi one is 15. Motherfucker, it's not anything with this. There is no exceptions with this in Mississippi. It's Mississippi.
Yeah.
The ahistorical like lens that, and they're eating it up too. I don't know anyone who actually watches Michael Knowles personally, but who is watching this and is like, yup, that's right.
I mean, I don't think people like necessarily consume that to be like, yeah, that, you know, that resonates with my flawed understanding that I also got from other forms of propaganda, and you're just reinforcing it in my hog brain as it short circuits, and I go to Comet Ping Pong after the segment ends. But like, I think it's more so just trotting out bullshit to muddy the waters, because that's something that's very effective, I think, as a tactic to make the actual positions on this confusing to their electorate. I mean, not to sound like a giant fucking lib here and invoke the Russians, but that fucking book by Dugin, where it was, you know, the foundations of geopolitics, where he basically explains, you know, how to fuck with the heads of Westerners. I think there's some grains of truth in that, and the Republican Party follows some of the same tactics by just muddying the waters and filling the discussion with so much bullshit that it's impossible for their electorate to even find out what's true.
Yeah,
and
they're just gish galloping again.
Yeah, and with sort of the concomitant attack on credentialed people, academics, physicians, or otherwise, especially with how, you know, almost borderline reactionary the American Medical Association is and can be sometimes. It feels like even the source of people with credentials is like, yeah, Fox is right. It's like, hey, what the fuck? Excuse me. Like, I know the AMA has like come out and made statements against this in particular, but I think it's just really lip service when a lot of fucking physicians ultimately still hold those views. Like, I don't know if we actually have survey data, so I'm just kind of speaking from anecdotal experience, but having worked with some, like, they're just as reactionary as, you know, your farmer from Arkansas watching Fox News. Like,
you just have to get them on the right topics to get that side out. Yeah,
exactly. They're better at concealing it because they have to, you know, go about their day to day in a very liberal institution. But you get them talking, you get them to let the mask slip a little bit, and you'll see what's underneath it. It's the same exact visage.
True.
100%. So, Greg, we were holding off on the EPA ruling until you got here. So, what are your thoughts on the EPA one?
Damn, man. I mean, I read the listened to the oral arguments and read the decision. I guess before we get into it, dude, I'm going to miss Breyer a lot. When you listen to the oral arguments, like he's actually bringing in stats and data and stuff into it. And you're like, damn, this is cool. You know, there's just like this way that the other justices seem to look at their roles where it's just like, we're just going to figure this all out right here. And Breyer seems to kind of like bring in this whole argument from data and facts and stuff. That's really, really interesting. So I'm excited to hopefully see someone else take up that element going forward. Yeah, man, I don't know. It's like, it's really frustrating when you're listening to this and they like, at least like when you're listening to the oral arguments for like Heller and Second Amendment stuff, like they're talking about things that they know about, and they're talking about old laws. They're talking about English common law and stuff like that. And it's like, at least it's grounded in things that make sense. Like I don't agree with Scalia's like decisions, but like it's interesting how he talks about, you know, the English Common Law 1658 to the ratification 1791 and how the Second Amendment, how he views it. This is like some weird kind of abstraction where basically it's like the EPA can't regulate something that's not explicitly stated in the legislation that created the EPA, and it's just kind of it gets into this weird point where it's like, okay, so then like we have to explicitly state everything that we're going to regulate, every compound. Like is CO2, is carbon 12 and carbon 13 included when we're talking about CO2? Do we have to specify there? Because they're separate. Like what if we like discover a new pollutant or like something, you know, do we have every single time that we have a science paper, do we need to go through the legislature and get it amended into the Clean Air Act? It's just, it gets like this area that's just very odd. And I mean, the EPA themselves, it's kind of like a weird thing that happened. They basically said that they went back on their previous ruling, the clean power plants, clean guidance bill, and said that we don't have the regulatory power in order to do that, to say that like you have to, in order to be a power plant, you have to have these emission standards and this kind of stuff. And they replaced it with something called ACE. And they basically saying that like, okay, we're going to talk about CO2 and regulatory capture in general. And Roberts basically kind of like in his opinion kind of just uses the EPA's own argument against themselves and basically says, hey, you guys thought it was, you know, you didn't have the questions. It's called the Great Questions Doctrine, where it's like, you know, if you're going to be broad and, you know, have regulatory abilities, you have to have specific powers and stuff. And I don't know, man, it's just really frustrating listening to a bunch of people that don't know ecology, have no environmental science degrees. They're sitting there talking about things that I don't feel like they have any idea about. And it's very frustrating.
Well, I mean, think about what you just said. Like, Breyer is the only person citing actual scientific data and evidence in their argumentation. Like, why does Breyer have to be the fucking science guy? If Democrats, the party of #believe the science, they all should be the science people. Where the fuck are they all defending our institution and what our, research output collectively has said we need to do to, blunt the effects of climate change? Why is it just Breyer holding up the mantle as he's on his fucking way out? Like, Maybe Ketanji Brown Jackson will be, base science queen from here on out. I don't know. But even if she is or isn't, it doesn't fucking matter, because, our expectation for the judiciary is that, they're going to be considering, the collective input of society and its institutions and their rulings, and not just whatever the fucking Federalist Society tells them to. But that mentality also needs to be applied to left-leaning judges insofar as, here are the fucking facts. You have scientific facts, which have been proven through years of research, and here's what they say the solutions are and the strategies are to address insert issue here. So, that is something that the Democrats should absolutely take a mantle in moving forward, like as far as the judiciary, especially if we, have a literal miracle and we manage to fucking pack the court. Like, throw a fucking scientist on there. Fuck it. Why not?
Yeah.
They throw political operatives on there.
Agreed.
Goddamn, put Bill Nye on the fucking court. I don't give a shit.
I think you have to, man. Like, I think like if we're gonna, like, it doesn't make any sense to me that you have the framers of the Constitution basically saying that like lawyers are optional in our judicial system. Like, you can represent yourself in court. They don't have like like lawyers don't, obviously they've studied law, right? So they're going to decide like what is constitutional or stuff like that. But to have only a system of governments where lawyers themselves appoint themselves to oligarchical branches of government that then can decide and wipe out democratic parts of our government, it just seems like there's a ruling class now and it's lawyers. And it's just kind of like, it's very odd to me that this is like seem okay. If this is going to be the norm now, that the Supreme Court makes these broad expansions where they're deciding science, what's settled science in the medical field and the environment, it only behooves us to have a more diverse Supreme Court, I think. And there's no restrictions on who can be on the Supreme Court. It's anyone that the Senate confirms. So in theory, you could have a scientist on there. You could have a medical doctor.
Well, what you're referring to with it seems like there's a different class and they're all lawyers. That's the professional managerial class. That's quite literally a thing in theory. But to your point, it doesn't matter if we pack the court. It doesn't matter if we get people who know science, because the Republicans will just appoint more Federalist Society people whenever they get into the executive branch. And round will go, and we'll have like 40, 50 people in the Supreme Court. The system itself is inherently flawed. It is broken in its entire inception. So we have to get rid of it. There's no more like legitimacy, if there ever was any, to the Supreme Court. It has to go. We don't even have to listen to them. We don't. It's a suggestion.
For people who hated monarchs so much, they sure gave a select few people like overwhelming legislative power in the country.
Yeah. I mean,
if you read the Constitution, like it really frustrates me. Like people think that there's like a triple branch of a government, right? Where you have like three power players, like all going around. And it's like, that'd be like watching a hockey game and being like, wow, there's three teams out there really playing good tonight. And you're like, no, there's actually two teams and there's the refs. You don't really consider the refs as like one of the teams that is playing the game. And even Chief Justice Roberts says this like in his confirmation hearing, where it's like, we're just calling balls and strikes here. But it's like, and even in his Robert's conclusion, it's like, Congress needs to pass these laws and it's like, well, they did that already. They passed the laws to protect the environment. That's what the EPA is. That's what the Clean Air Act was. So he's just asking them to do more of that they've already done. It's just very frustrating.
Yeah.
Well, if you're ready for more frustration, I can give you the shortest line in the Texas GOP 2022 platform. The only thing that they have when they say about science is that they want to eliminate classifying CO2 as a pollutant. That's it. That's the whole point that they're trying to go for. And make no mistake, that is the largest GOP state organization representing millions of voters. If you don't think that that's the end goal of the Republican Party, like I think even what's his name? Oh, he has the most annoying voice. Lindsey Graham. Close. Lindsey Graham said that he recognized that climate change is man-made, but we shouldn't dismantle the oil industry. That's it. That was the full point of his entire messaging. They don't give a shit. They'll at the end of the day, the closest that our elected officials will come to doing anything is just talking about it and saying like, well, yeah, it's man-made, but come on, think of the economy.
Yeah, line. What about line?
Think of all those miners who are going to lose their jobs in the coal mine.
Yeah, put the kids to work, man. Get a job, kids. Jeez. To Gremlo's point,
we
though,
need
like
that profit.
to Gremlo's point, I think he's like completely right here. I mean, you look at like North Carolina and all those Civil Rights Act decisions, and like them saying that these districts are too gerrymandered, and it's not like those states were just like, oh shit, guys, it's all been blown, we got to change it, we got to go back to even. They just basically changed the title on it, changed as little stuff as possible, and then it just shoots it right back out. So it's like, if I was the EPA right now, it's like, oh, we can't mandate CO2. Okay, we're going to do carbon 13 then, or carbon 12 actually, that we're putting into the environment. But it's like, just change it around, play this game. If this is what it has to be, then like play the game.
I wish they would fight like Republicans do. I really do. Like, the Republicans don't give a fuck. Legal systems going through the correct avenues, jurisprudence, fetishism, they're like, who cares about all that? No. Whatever institutionalists are in the Democratic Party need to get out. It's over for you. That's it. Gauntlet's been thrown down. That's it. You're done. We can't do this anymore. We have a very limited timeline to course correct. And the frustrating thing is, I don't really have a whole lot of faith in the current people in the party. It's all, the only faith I have right now is in like actual grassroots mobilization. That's it. My only faith is in work stoppages. You're muted, Smight.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was muted. I think that the only thing that helps me sleep at night is just the rapid creation of unions that we've seen in the past, 2-3 years now. People are like, I always mention this, that Republicans, like Republican voters and Democratic voters, are feeling the pressures of like late stage capitalism. We are all subject to inflation, to the consolidation of goods and services, the phasing out of the individual landlord for
regulatory capture.
Yeah, all of this stuff, like your average voter feels. The only difference between Democratic voters and Republican voters is who they're told is the problem. And for Republican voters, it becomes minorities, it becomes people on welfare, it becomes like these easy scapegoats with no representation, right? That can't defend themselves like legally or vocally, and they become an easy scapegoat, right? And for Democrats, it's just Republican Party shenanigans, like, oh, come on, they're just wilding out, and we gotta like balance the system out, as if this is like a friendly battle between the Jedi and the Sith, and we just have to meet them in the middle, so the Death Star doesn't fucking annihilate us all or some bullshit. But the whole point is that when you start to affect people's individual experiences, how much they pay at the gas station, how much their groceries cost, their access to medical care, things like that, you can radicalize them in any way possible. And I think that like for the left, we can look at these rising labor movements, which are definitely comprised of Republican voters as well, and look at that positively, and then try to expand upon that. That doesn't mean I think you all should go and debate your local Republican about shit and try to do this on an individual level. But definitely trying to build that messaging and try to make people aware of how they are disenfranchised,
Yeah. Your coworkers are the people you're going to be able to affect the most. Your coworkers and your friends, I don't think you're going to be able to get your family. You know what your family's like. But, try as much as you can. But I really think like coworkers and like people within your friend circle, those are the people you can radicalize the easiest, because you're spending the most amount of time with them.
Yeah, man. So like this week I went through like a big change and trying to see kind of like who are the scientists on Twitter that I follow the most, and trying to like look up to scientifically to see what they were saying about SCOTUS's Roe decision or this EPA decision. And it was just like nobody. Like Francis Arnold, there was some like David Liu, I really like. He came out in support of like reproductive rights. Eric Topol did, which is cool. And then I look at like Francis Arnold and stuff, and I'm like, I really look up to her scientifically, and she's just saying nothing. And then I'm thinking like, well, maybe she has like a political account or something. She's like talking or saying stuff, and I'm like, dude, that'd be awful. I would be so mad. And then I thought about myself, and I'm like, dang, dude, I have like a Twitch or a YouTube, Twitter thing. And I was like, you know what, dude, I just need to like make my official like science Twitter, like my tie it to my stream, tie it to my YouTube. I kind of did it. I didn't do it because of like, I didn't want people that know my last name, but then, I'm proud of my papers. I want to talk about it. And I also want to like hold other people to account. And how can I do that if I'm not even going to be transparent with who I am? So like, hopefully like people like scientists and stuff, especially after this EPA decision, good God, so many people, their animating decision to like get into science is because of, what's happening to the environment. So I mean, I really hope now. If it's not now, then I mean, what are you waiting for, man?
Well, I mean, it goes back to what Gremla said about theory earlier. I mean, a lot of the time, especially when you talk to the fucking likes of people, or at least one of them you've already talked to, Henkel and Haas, they will literally say, scientists, physicians, they're all professional managerial class, bourgeoisie, STEM lords who are actually the oppressors, and therefore you can't take anything they say seriously. And the grains of truth in there are that a lot of the times, people can view scientists and physicians as sort of what is called like a petite bourgeoisie in terms of like they have more solidarity towards the people who are ruining the fucking country on the basis of class, simply because they make more money generally than the average worker. They're a little bit more well off, and so their material interests, in theory, align closer to that of the rich overlords rather than the average working American. But the thing is, like, I think I mentioned this before you arrived, Greg. As it pertained to Roe, there's actually a lot of like grad students and postdocs and scientists who are now like actively making career decisions to stay away from states where they won't have rights, or where abortion isn't explicitly protected, or they're wanting to leave the country entirely, and it's going to cause a brain drain. So I think, like, on a personal level, a lot of the scientists are feeling it, but I think what you're looking for, and what I would agree with you on, is that you want to see greater social advocacy, and you want to see a greater sort of material economic advocacy coming from within science. And a lot of us just sit around and pretend like there's nothing happening outside of the ivory tower. Like, I've made some awkward jokes with my advisor about it when, two of his fucking grad students who are women just lost their fucking rights. One of whom literally had to abort an ectopic pregnancy in order to live, like 6 months ago. And, of course I know he stands with us, but it's like, okay, speak, be loud, say it explicitly, shout it to the fucking rafters. Like, just tacitly acknowledging that this is a problem isn't enough. Mm-hmm. And we want to see more people within this institution actually incorporate activism into their career work.
If you even get them mentioning it at all. I haven't.
Right.
Even just like
for the other women in the lab.
I mean, a lot of universities are putting out public statements against this decision. So just fucking retweet it, man. Just like it's like the easiest thing you can do.
Mine didn't. Mine was like, we know there are very strong feelings on both sides. That's the closest they came. And then they were like, we want our patients to get good care.
Yeah, that's awful.
Paragraphs.
At least the University of California.
If you want patients to get healthcare, you support abortion. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I think they were trying to say it without saying it, without pissing off the Mormons. So.
Yeah, see, that's the thing.
They're benefactors probably.
But like, it's a big thing. Even like, let's say I'm in California, so it's thankfully for my wife, and like we're not. I mean, she's pregnant right now. This is something that's really on my mind personally. We're not really that impacted in this state, but even so, there's a huge amount of people that are collaborators or in other labs. Like, as a PI, how could you stand by and be like, you're collaborating with all these grad students and other labs and stuff that are having these huge decisions to make, where now, I don't know. It's just like, it just really is crazy to me. It's just really frustrating.
Yeah, I can't speak for a ton. I graduated last May, so but within like the within the historical community, aside from like, you can we always make a joke that you can always find the right leaning historians if they like focus on medieval history
or Rome. I've heard.
Yeah, ancient history. Those dudes are super nerds, and they all love to rub it in your face. But as far as like most historians, most professors that I interacted with and stuff like that, the vast majority of them are fairly left leaning, and I think that the reason for that is, especially when you get closer to modern history, when you get closer to like the institutions that make up America, you would have to be very selective in your research to be able to overlook the horrific nature that this country was founded on, and the institutions and how they affect people. Like people complain about now, like, oh, critical race theory and shit like that. It's like, guys, when we look at historical outcomes for minorities in this country, that's not critical race theory. That's just fucking history. I don't know what to tell you. You know,
I'm so sick of hearing about the fucking founding fathers.
Oh God!
Oh my God! The
People-
So tired of it.
deified, slave-owning white men and their Bible, the Constitution.
Here's
Okay.
okay.
Rapists.
nonsense who couldn't wipe their own ass.
I always
True.
tell people that, like, when they try to bring up like the founding fathers or some shit like that, you have no idea the environment that they existed in or their like depth of thought. You have no fucking idea, because people like think of history like a movie where we started out not as developed but good intentioned, and then we just progressively got better and better, you know, more developed, the modernist approach to historical analysis. And I always have to tell people, like, no, motherfucker, it's a mosaic. These are all individual pieces and they need to be studied like that. Your rudimentary understanding of American history is so outside of like how academics look at this shit. It's laughable that you bring it up as a defense for your idea, because you make it so obvious that you don't know what you're talking about. And like hell, a fucking SCOTUS did that. It's beyond infuriating. I went into it earlier. I won't rehash it now. But
Well, it's very
Can
weird.
I just say how reassuring it is to have another like academic person be frustrated by something that the political sphere is doing? Because I bet Marcus and I were raging like you are during COVID and still are raging because it's not.
It's very weird to me.
I mean,
like you read the
Greg.
like Dobbs, for example, and like you have, the conservative, who's Clarence Thomas, who was writing the majority, talking and citing like English common law in 1658 and like talking about all this stuff, but then they like write off all these other laws that were written in the 20th century. And it's just like very weird to me because they take that historical background and be like, the 1658 common law makes a big impact on the Second Amendment. But then all these new regulations don't. Like, how does that make any sense? Like, how would that have more of an impact on like what everyday is and our everyday occurrence and what like kind of like the living reality? And Breyer even talks about this in his dissent. He's like talking about all these stats and all this kind of stuff. He's like, how does this make no difference other than this weird historical 1658 argument? It's just very weird.
Well, it really goes into just another issue that I have when when people that don't study try to use history in their arguments. It becomes a game. These are fun facts to pull up for my argument.
Trivia
did you
night.
know? Yeah, did you know that X happened in this time? It's like, wow, that's neat. And what else was going on? What are the cultural impacts of that?
Exactly.
What was the resistance to it?
Just give him an AP history exam.
Oh, Jesus Christ. All of the people, I argued with someone yesterday about this, talking about immigration, saying that we should make immigration harder. And I was like, motherfucker, you couldn't pass the citizenship test, all right? They're going to give you that history test. Who's the 19th president? Go. Like, you're gonna ask them these random, trivial, nonsense facts that you don't remember, that you learned in third grade, because of course you don't. You know, our education system's a joke, but then you think you know history. And so people try to then, like, again, pull these facts like fucking like the little fortune cookie lines, right? And then say, here's your proof.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I do understand, at least to an extent, of like what it is to be academic, and also infuriated that people manipulate data, manipulate statistics or facts.
Yeah.
Dude, you sound like me whenever someone tries to bring up IQ. Because we don't like use that in sociology. Like, well, we do, but it's like one tool in our tool belt that we aren't super fond of.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a rusty tool that's filled with fucking tetanus, and yet people still want to use it. Like,
Jesus Christ.
The benefit does not outweigh the risk of looking like an ass clown. If you're talking about IQ, just talk about something else, please.
Yeah, don't, especially after like the bell curve and shit. Like, nah.
Yeah.
Just throw it all away.
Not
Fuck
worth it.
Yeah. It's a tool of little tiny segue here, but that the IQ, how we view statistics and our like fetishization on like statistical information began out of the 19th century here in the United States, and it was mostly from essentially racist science, right?
Yeah, eugenics.
Yeah, eugenics, people trying to justify the poor treatment of minorities, or prescriptive statements about what to do about minorities in the United States.
Phrenology.
Yeah, phrenology, all of that stuff kind of came out of that. I'm not saying that every piece of that obviously is useless, but we should take it with a grain of salt when we talk about like that kind of stuff. You guys know 1350? That's from fucking 1890s. That's when that is. Conservatives have no new arguments. They use the same shit. Yeah, they just recycle the same shit.
Hey, if it's not broken, no need to fix it. It still works.
Yeah, right. Except it was debunked by fucking W.E.B. Du Bois. Yeah. And we're still having to talk about it as if it's some brand new spanking theory that came out yesterday.
Yeah, the only time conservatives will ever recycle is the same old arguments that they've been using since the beginning of fucking time.
Got 'em.
Yes.
I mean, it's just so like, and I think Greg and Smight, this goes back to the notion of like academic pedantry and action.
Mm-hmm.
But like, because those arguments are so fucking old, it doesn't take very much to get out of your office chair and like debunk them quickly. Like this isn't something that takes an entire crack research team of your best and brightest postdocs to figure out. Like you could fucking find a whole array of literature in probably 30 minutes on Google Scholar to actually effectively decouple why IQ was a useless measure and how eugenicists used it for race science purposes. Like that as an example, you could figure that out in a fucking flash. Yeah. But people don't. They feel compelled to just follow the example of the modern Democratic Party and just virtue signal, pay lip service to a social issue, and move on like nothing's happening. And that's, I think, what's really the most frustrating part for me is like the world is crumbling around the laboratory that we're working in all the time. It's only a matter of time before the cracks, start piercing the laboratory windows. Are we going to fucking sit here and just crumble in the goddamn tower after everything else has fallen? Do we want to have a vantage point of the ashes of society? That's useless. That's going to be fucking useless. We need to do something.
This is quite literally what got, this little thing we've been doing every Thursday started, was this apoliticization of academia. So I'm the filthy undergrad of the group. So
not true. I'm an undergrad too. For now.
Well,
we're all learning.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm the dummy, right? But what is it that something? What is something that those in the halls of intelligentsia can do right now? We know what we can do policy wise. In the meantime, before we, one day, God willing, get something done with the Supreme Court. But what's something like in academia we can do to push back right now? Like, do we offer more data? That clearly doesn't affect anything, because the data, again, is always going to be on the side of, a leftist slant. Like, what's something that we're missing out on?
So I can't speak for the other academic realms here, obviously, but historians, it's a little bit tricky because, like, you can, specify into whatever era topic that you want, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got historians of all different walks of life. I think that the best thing that historians can do is probably try to produce popular media, right? One thing that we're notoriously bad at is writing for the general public.
Are you telling me that Ancient Aliens is not educational?
Listen, as a historian, I can't deny the historical reality of Ancient Aliens. Okay, it's all true.
Can't
you heard it here first.
You have no negative evidence.
Yeah, there's no negative evidence. Okay, that's all 100% true. All right, tell them Smight Knight told you.
Okay.
No, but I think that one thing I always like to tell people, and I tell people on my stream all the time, I don't try to gatekeep like who is and who isn't like a historian. I've read plenty of great historical works by people who didn't have degrees, and things like that. It's more about like the methodology. I do think you do have to know how to write, and I think you know how to like conduct research, but that's pretty much it. If you know how to do those two things, you can. Who am I to stand in your way, right? That being said, right, producing popular stuff. Some of the best historical analysis I've ever like seen that's digestible for like an everyday person is on YouTube and stuff like that. Like Knowing Better has great historical videos and stuff like that.
I love Knowing Better.
Yeah, like absolutely. You can find these channels, by like people that like maybe they don't have a degree in a specified field or something like that, but they know how to do the research and they know how to present it in a way that is entertaining, or at least entertaining enough to keep like, an average person that is like occupied and also educated, And I think, like I said, I think that's something that academia within the historical field is not the best at,
There are dozens of us.
We stop our education at normally 12. Most people don't go into higher education, and we stop learning there. And there's just no more. I'm not super on board with Noam Chomsky's like people are going to the malls instead of the libraries thing. I think there is some entertainment and creature comforts that come with commodity fetishization, but the content people are engaging with today is completely mind-numbing, and to a point. I mean, Amber and I have talked about it before, how like mindless content is it's not terrible, but like fuck, dude.
No, I would say it's good, depending on the content. Yeah, you need mind-numbing content sometimes.
Yeah, I think that we've talked about it before, but fuck, dude, people do not do anything outside of their K through 12 education, and they just get whatever propaganda is spoon-fed to them. They have no media literacy.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
that's exactly what we saw with COVID too. Like the parallels between this and COVID are insane, but yeah.
I mean, I think you to target academics specifically, I think you like hit them, where they are, and the whole underpinning of academia right now is publish or perish. That's like that's the meta, where it's like you have to publish, you have to get things out there, and it's at a higher level, and it's all run through these journals. So I think that you tell and you put pressure on the journals to say, hey, like for every publication, you need to send out. I mean, we're spending $4,000 in order to freaking publish in some of these journals. And it's like you can send out like a team, or you can request an audio, or you could do I don't know, video chat or something like that, where the researchers have to explain their research so people can make it accessible, because they're putting it behind a paywall, so most people can't read it. And then two, you make it like easy for the that content to be accessible, that video to be accessible. And I think one of the big problems with science specifically is that we basically dumb down everything to the levels where people like can't. You're not even talking about the same thing. So it's like, that's like one of the reasons why I don't have a TikTok, for example, because I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to embrace this. I'm trying to raise the level of discourse, not like dumb it down so that, like just so it loses all of its coolness and value. So I think that's it. You kind of like create this push to have to put stuff on YouTube, and then also that stuff on YouTube is educational. Like I actually, when I go on channels and talk about stuff, like I went on In Time talking about nanotechnology, like I'm using the words that we use in academia, but I'm explaining them. So we're talking about the difference between nanoparticles and nanotechnology, and what the difference is, and why we use different words. Not just like nanoparticles is like the Lego, and nanotechnology is like the Darth Lord Lego thing. You know what I mean? Like don't change the whole thing. Like talk about it so that people can use the keywords to actually learn.
That's the problem I had with COVID coverage. It was either dumbed down to barely an essence of what's actually going on, leaving plenty of room for disinformation and poor interpretation, or it was literal academic papers that average people aren't going to want to read because it's so loaded with jargon. Like there was nothing out there that treated you like an adult talking about the mechanisms of COVID, but an adult that wasn't versed in science. Like there was nothing out there in that middle space. And I think that's like kind of a big problem with academia as it stands right now.
Sadly, the best like publicly available explanation of coronavirus I saw during like the height of COVID in America was from Family Guy. It was awful.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, sad times.
I mean, the CDC was okay, like their website was okay, but it was still like very bare bones explanation of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you want to really get down in the fucking weeds of the CDC, like their website is entirely like poorly formatted. You can't navigate it. Shit's like hidden between 5 fucking web pages.
Oh, yeah.
It literally,
There's no
it's literally
change log.
like, yeah, there's no change log. There's no version history. Like somebody could buy a fucking website on Squarespace and do a better job than the official CDC website. Like it's pitiful.
very true.
They probably don't hire like a single fucking web designer. It's probably like one monkey in a lab coat, you know, hyped up on fucking cocaine, actually making the website.
Yeah, it's
Trying
some
to
intern
transcribe.
trying to get college credits that's interning at the like CDC or something.
Yeah, research credits for people who go to either University of Maryland or University of Virginia, since they're close to fucking DC.
Well,
But as far as like academia is concerned, Greg and Amber, you both speak to the fact that like the necessary work that befalls academics at a time like this, a time that is very full of like tumultuous circumstances and conditions to live in every way, that work isn't valued. Like Greg, all that work that you did, that you don't get paid for that. You don't get
not at all.
I keep it. You don't get credit.
I don't tell my PI about my YouTube channel because he would use it against me. Because he would say, he would be like, oh, so you're wasting time on YouTube? You're wasting time right now? Like right now with this panel, I could be at the lab. Why am I not at the lab?
Yeah, that's experiment time. What are you doing?
Exactly, man. I don't want, he's actually talked to us about in lab meeting. He's like, how do you run a YouTube channel? Does anyone have any experience editing videos? And I'm just like
nope. What's YouTube? I'm also a boomer hog like you.
Exactly. I'm not getting down that road, dude. It's hard enough doing the lab website. Oh my god, it is so bad.
Yeah, but like academics don't get any skill sets involving like talking to other humans or communicating or outreach in any component of their training, save programs in the humanities where as a that's more intrinsic to the nature of the work that they do. It involves like
or one class in grad school.
Yeah, my one science communication class where it was a French woman who could speak English okay-ish, and some old fucking white guy who's actually on my thesis committee and he's really nice, but he's just like, so the work that I personally selected for the class is rewriting your research in every different media format. Write a paragraph description for every media form. Like, bitch, that doesn't give me a transferable skill. That doesn't help me talk to other people, relate to other people. That just tells me how to write the same thing in a bunch of different ways. And it's not even going to be a scientist's job to write most of it anyways. They have professionals to write press releases, to write summaries. Like, holy shit, you barely have time to write the fucking paper when you're a PI yourself. You're just applying for grant money constantly.
Well, dude, this weird
thing makes no fucking sense. The way the system is structured, it makes no sense. It doesn't actually create incentives to do the necessary work.
So go ahead, Smight Knight. Go ahead. Okay, I have one anecdote. Sorry, on this real quick. I'm like first year of my PhD. I'm coming in. I know that there's an intersection. This is right at 2017. So I'm like, dude, I want to get a PhD, but I also want to get involved in local politics. There's like a science to policy like group coming up at my university. I'm like, dude, this is based like a bunch of scientists getting involved with policy and politics. I'm down. Basically, like a year down the road, I figure out it's just like basically creating scientists to making them politicians and like how to write legislation, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, no, dude, I want to be a scientist, but impact policy. I don't want to become a politician. It's like, oh, it's so frustrating.
Listen, if public discourse, now I'll let you get to it in a sec, Smight, has shown anything, what you need to affect policy from a propaganda standpoint is just lie, because that's what libs of TikTok does, and they're literally writing legislation.
Well, and they're directing the fascist hit squads.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Jesus, yes. I almost forgot about them for a brief moment. It was very nice. I was just going to say that I think we're all like describing a problem in politics, and to your point, homozygote, you said that it doesn't make sense, like why we do this. It's the same historically as well, where we all write for journals to people, like for the 8 people that are going to read it. It needs to be peer reviewed by other professors to do a quota so that they meet that quota so that they can keep their tenure. And that's pretty much it, right? And then grad students who need to read your stuff. That's pretty much it. Those are the only people reading like what you're posting is other academics. We are a very cannibalistic like group of people. And that is not a mistake. It is because institutions like the ones we all go to school in are manipulated by capitalism. They're all supposed to generate profit. And it's all about where that profit is generated, right? So I don't know what schools you guys went to, but the school I went to had a super large sports program, right? That's how our school mostly made money. We literally cut the phone lines to our professors' offices in the history department to save money in the same year, bringing in like $20 million from our sports team. The money, that is generated goes back into what makes the most money for our stuff, right? Stuff that really doesn't generate inherent like dollar value. Publishing in a journal, for instance, right, does not necessarily generate a dollar value. But what it does do is make sure that an institution maintains its accreditation, make sure that they are still up to date on the latest like research. It's a way to draw people in and to also put stuff out there to say, look, we're still producing academic worth and academic value, even though we're stripping those departments of all of their funding and just putting it solely into the departments that do make money.
Publishing does generate a dollar value, but it's for the journals. It's not for the people actually creating the work. It's for the fucking people who just archive it to show everybody that hey, look, a productivity has happened. But I mean,
and that's your money.
Speak to
line
you
go
paid
up.
for that.
Yeah, literally. Like straight up, you are paying for line to go up for someone else. Like it is the most cucked shit. I don't know how else to really phrase it, but we are just captive to make money for other people except ourselves. That's a training system that we, for better or worse, subject ourselves to by going to grad school, where we're spending 5 to 6 years making other people money, and then come out the back end expecting that system to reward us with the same, profit-seeking behavior when we either become academics ourselves or we go work for a giant biotech company or some shit. Like we expect the capitalistic money urge at the expense of everything else to fucking help us, get our table scraps when it's our time. It's so personally aggravating because people lose sight of everything happening around them because they trap themselves in that mentally. Like they're just always hyper focused on that productivity and they lose sight of everything else. And that right now is, I think, one of those moments, like you were saying earlier, Greg, people are losing sight of the greater social conditions and economic conditions they labor in. Just like everybody else outside of academia, like they're laborers, they have more class solidarity towards the ordinary person, but they feel like they have to fucking align themselves with the rich overlords instead. So they just ignore shit, tune out, and pay lip service when there's absolutely pressure bearing down on them.
And even like, it's weird reading the EPA decision. It's like reading, even in the case where it's like, it was actually working. Like this cap and trade kind of system that coal fire power plants could use, or natural gas power plants or something could use in order to, if they weren't getting the emission standards that they needed, they could basically cap and trade and change credits to like another power plant. And the whole part of this thing, like that the reason why this whole thing started is because these coal-fired power plants were basically saying that there's no way that we can economically like make money if these are the limitations on it. And it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of the whole point. Maybe we should like go down on coal. Yeah, maybe we should like phase them out if they can't hit the emission standards. Isn't that the whole point? And by the way, the whole thing, like we're trying to go from, the EPA was trying to go from 38% of our electricity generated by coal to 27% over 16 years. This isn't like some like, we're not going down to zero here. This is like a very conservative, very like moderate way of actually doing this. And it's like, and it was actually working way before we were supposed to. We were like 10 years before the emissions that we were supposed to be doing it, and it was going great. And then here comes SCOTUS, and it was like, oh yeah, this entire system like is happening. It's just it's not feasible. And just like I don't get it. Even in the cases where it does work and we actually are seeing progress and stuff, it's just I don't understand their whole reason for being like, why like such a big thing, like why such a sweeping change. And I do think that this could be like a big thing for other pollutants, basically. Like if you're not, because for example, the part that the law and the Clean Air Act that establishes the EPA that can regulate this stuff, it explicitly says power plants and manufacturers and industry and stuff like that. So what if you're outside of that? How is that? And can you pollute like what you want? That's not explicitly out there. You know, if you're an oil company, can you just like pollute now into the ocean and be like, that's where we found it. We found it in the ocean and we're dumping oil now. So, and you're not explicitly saying that we can't. So why not? You know, it's like, it just gets us into this whole legal world that is just so frustrating, so weird.
Well, I wonder if it's for, you know, because like keep in mind, Republicans are always on a grift, right? They're always on a grift. They don't give a shit about coal, like power plants. They don't give a shit about coal miners. Like the coal industry has, just through developments in other energy fields, has shrunk like dramatically over the past like century. They haven't done anything to save it, right? I think that this ruling probably will go into what you were hinting at, is that it's supposed to affect other sectors as well, essentially limiting what the EPA can track, what they can do, how they can enforce, you know, their policies and stuff like that. And I think, you know, call me a conspiracy theorist, I think that's probably aimed at, you know, oil and gas, most likely.
Because I mean, if you look at the numbers, the non-carbon emitting electricity sources for California, it's 63%. So California gets 63% of its energy from renewables, large hydro, and nuclear. The United States entirely, all of the United States, which includes California, so that's going to be a big chunk of this, 19%. So you have a large percentage of the United States that's just like, we're going to be coal. This is us. We're coal now. And even in the oral arguments, they're talking about it's not fair to these power plants because you're not letting them naturally kind of like die out. You're pushing it on them. And we're talking about billions of dollars and stuff that needs to be spent now. The entire revenue for all of the electricity, the market, is $380 billion a year. A couple $1 billion is nothing. It is nothing. It's just, their arguments are just so weird. It's just, it's very bad faith. I don't know. It's just.
Yeah, they just don't care.
What
They're using whatever
ruling,
rhetoric is going to be effective.
What was the ruling on the indigenous land reservation law system? Didn't they like completely strike it down pretty much?
That was that
allows them
5
to
1.
I think it allows them to prosecute people on
native land,
native land, as well as federal prosecutions. So basically, if someone goes to a reservation who has committed a crime, then the federal government can't not go into a reservation to find people. It's going to be abused, of course, but before it would have to be like tribal courts and police that would have to.
I liked how they tried to justify it after the internet exploded with like, just go to reservations for abortions because they have their own laws. So they tried to justify that Supreme Court ruling with that same, like, we don't want people going around it, but bitch, you didn't think about it. You just, come on. You had another excuse lined up until people started talking about that. And then you're like, oh, that's a good reason to strike that down.
I mean, you wouldn't even be able to go to the res to get that those procedures done because they already made a statement. It's like, this is exclusively for people who live on the reservation. It's not for people to.
They were
come over
talking
here.
about opening like abortion havens, like for everyone, not like specifically
talking
for
about
everyone,
it.
but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be abused. Make no mistake, because saying like, oh well, if somebody's committed a crime and they're hiding on a reservation, we can't go there, and we have to rely on, reservation courts and police. No, this is so that like Bortak can bust down the doors of unsuspecting indigenous people who are living on res.
Guys, listen, it's about human rights.
Well, yeah,
wow, look at them caring.
We're America. We care
giving a
about these
shit.
things.
Yeah.
I mean, fuck, we've already done enough to indigenous people. Like, goddamn, dude. We just have to turn it up to like 15. Just gonna bust down their goddamn doors anyways on their own land.
Dude,
I mean, that's what we've been doing before, but like more so now.
Dude, did you see the Crowder clip whenever that ruling came out?
Oh God!
Oh, God.
What did he fucking dress up like a goddamn Indian?
I was about to say,
American?
yeah.
No,
And then-
he just said that you're a conquered people. Get over it.
Holy shit!
My.
That's fucking egregious.
Mask off. Whoops.
Yeah.
Steven
I mean,
Crowder
yeah,
is
Steven
the
Crowder.
racist channel.
He tries to act like he's not. He's just, I'm just asking
Does he?
questions. I'm just saying. Well,
Does he though? Like the Black Farmer segment?
I watched a clip on him talking about the bell curve, and he was like, I'm just presenting facts. Like, this isn't me saying any. I mean, obviously it's fucking racist, but like,
Yeah. The thing that
What he
Steven Crowder
says
does is he'll let his cronies make the most racist stuff, and then he'll say, oh, of course we disavow, of course Twitter's going to get on us for saying stuff like this, and then he'll double down. So
Yeah.
his friends will say it, his little like rogues gallery in the back, like dark corner, will say some super racist shit. He'll say, we disavow, and then he'll agree.
Did we all miss the one where he said that we got to give it to Hitler? And referring to trans people essentially and blaming trans people for radicalizing Hitler.
Yeah, they said radical transgenderism was one of the justifications for the Holocaust.
oh,
Yeah.
fuck me.
Oh, that's
And then he
insane.
had to clarify. He was like, "Wait, we're not saying that Hitler was good." And it's like, let me reverse that argument. Let me
What are
reverse
you
the tape
saying,
real quick.
Steven?
What
are you
are you
saying?
saying exactly? Yeah, but then there's the Black Farmer segment. I mean, yeah, when you said like, oh, he has an opinion on like indigenous people of America. Yeah, my immediate thought was, oh, he probably put on a headdress and then like reversed his speech to imitate like a foreign language, like
And
an
he's
old
done
that.
1950s film.
He's done that
Yeah,
before.
doing a tomahawk chop
yeah.
and shit.
Yeah,
The,
doing like the most racist thing you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, like the old like one tier across the cheek anti-littering ad. He did his own one, but it was like for pride. Yeah.
So how-
it was something like F words destroyed America, and now we can clean it up, something like that.
Or how about his famous "God hates figs" shirt?
My
You remember
favorite.
that one? I remember
Classic.
that
Oh
one.
my
Yeah.
god.
Jesus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a vintage.
Aged like milk.
Yeah.
I mean, it was already probably some pretty turbid milk to start with, but
Yeah.
it
Well,
also
yeah,
aged pretty
touche.
poorly. It got even worse and more rancid with the passage of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
This sounds like all conservatives at this point. They already fucking suck from the starting point, and they just keep getting worse.
Yeah, 100%. And they're all saying the same exact stuff. We've already heard everything they have to say. It's just going to be like, okay, well, in what spice are we adding to it today? How are we going to JQ with a little more MSG today? You know what I mean?
Okay, here I got one of those for you. Actually, back
Good.
on the row topic. Once it was officially repealed, my former roommate, my fucking literal Nazi
The
roommate.
hog one.
Oh yeah, the hog. He was posting on his Instagram
Oh yeah.
about it because he's a homeschooled Christian
Of
Catholic.
course.
Oh,
And that's what
Jesus.
broke his fucking brain. And now he's just a full bore white
Oh
nationalist.
no, that brain is perfectly formed how it's meant to be formed.
I mean, it
the
can
way
be
they
broken
wanted
while
it.
looking anatomically correct. It
No, the way
don't
they
send signal
wanted it.
right.
the way they wanted it formed. Very
Oh yeah, no,
reactionary.
the parents,
Yeah.
the parents formed it in their desired image for sure. But no, he was posting on his Instagram story and was like, "Well, God is so good that He's doing this to save the children, and how could anybody not want more children? Children are like flowers. They're so beautiful and wonderful. How could you not want more of them?"
I guess single.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, right after Arlie started, his girlfriend of like 5 or 6 years broke up with him, and I think it's because he was falling down the fucking pipeline. Looks like a fucking hog now. Like got a giant, like scraggly, unkempt beard that's like halfway down his fucking torso, long ass greasy hair. Like he's let himself go. I can tell.
Little victim of divorce court.
Yeah, divorce court at age 23.
Yeah, love to see it.
I got to sign with this on here, okay? If you are a right winger in the age of like your late teens to early 20s, yeah, you've got mad divorce dad energy, okay? I don't give a shit. You've got that energy, all right? It's true.
It's true.
Yeah, I'll back that.
Is.
Yeah.
It's like they're pre-gaming for family court.
Oh no, family court speedrun any %.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong, but I don't like the way you said it.
Well, it's crazy because like I even have people like this in my personal life. We played a lot of airsoft growing up, and I think we talked briefly about like the kind of reactionary or airsoft paintball to reactionary pipeline.
And gamers are mixed in there too.
Yeah, they were all gamers, of course. A lot of World of Warcraft players. There we go. One of these guys, the second he graduated high school, married his high school sweetheart, who like was a grade below him. So she was still like in high school whenever he deployed. Came back home, immediately got divorced, gained a bunch of weight, and now he's a cable installation guy.
And let me guess, has a profile picture with some shades on and talking about how the libs have gone crazy.
Oh yeah, he's got the Ford F-150 like slight
with the
lift.
Confederate flag transparent over his picture.
Or the back window.
No, nothing like that.
One of those tail nutsack things,
Yeah. Oh, my favorite.
The Calvin pissing on a fucking Democratic donkey logo.
Yes. He has one of those.
Oh, of course he does.
Fuck me.
Of course he does.
It fucking ruined Calvin and Hobbes, man. They take everything from us.
They do.
People keep putting "I did that" stickers of Biden pointing on the gas pumps that I go to.
My favorite are the people that tell you that if you try to take that off, that's a crime.
Yeah. Now people are selling on Etsy because like whoever came up with that idea is making bank on Etsy. But other people on Etsy have created like counter ones that say like Trump lost, you're in a cult. The president doesn't control the gas prices, or just has the screenshot of the Senate decision to not stop oil companies from doing price gouging. Just has a screenshot of that with all the Republican votes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen those.
I think my favorite one is the classic Wojak head empty. It's
thing
with the gas going in there. It's like, Biden
head.
make the gas go up. That one's pretty good. That one is pretty good, yeah.
Well, I mean, that kind of brings up an interesting point. Do we have to engage in like mimetic warfare to improve all of these things?
I posted I posted a paper in your Discord, Marcus, that was talked about the effect of memes on COVID, and it does have an impact. It does. I mean,
I think we looked at that one on stream. Actually, I think it was like recognition of. It was like an actual. It might have been like a Canadian province or something, but they were like trying to see if pro-vax memes dunking on anti-vaxxers made people more likely to get vaccinated.
Exactly.
Was that the one?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it does have an impact.
If the Democratic Party can insist that Russian meme bot farms stole the election, I think we can do it.
I mean, I hate like the memification of like everything, kind of like talking about what I was talking about before, where it's like everything has to be distilled down into like 5 words. But I mean, at the same time, man, I mean, it makes in science communication kind of like they talk about this, like you have to be able to communicate what you're talking about, and it's easily shareable. If there's one thing that I've learned And this is why I want to do the like the science figures and stuff with you. I want to try to make and create science figures that are in image format, because that's how everything is shared now. Everything is shared through images. Back in my image macros, but like for, I don't know, some way of like infographics or something like to try to get that stuff out there. I think it's probably the best and easiest way to share it on all your social medias, on all your friends, on your group chats, just an image.
It's sad to admit, but one of the things that got me interested in leftist literature, like reading Capital and Kropotkin and all that shit, was memes. The aesthetics of leftism was one thing that was like, okay, let's see what they're talking about. Let's see what they're reading. Okay, maybe I'll read Capital. And one of the shortcomings of the progressive left in America is a complete and utter lack of propaganda. We don't have any agitprop. We have a couple people who are doing like video essays on YouTube. We have very powerful memers in the trans community, and we have Twitch streamers. That's it. Yeah. We don't have a broader propaganda apparatus.
I got like radicalized to the left because of Twitch, actually. I became politically active towards the end of my, well, I guess like midway through my undergrad. And for the longest time, I just thought like, yeah, like liberal. Yeah. Bernie's good. I kind of hate like do nothing Democrats, stuff like that. But when I came to Twitch a little over a year ago, I, started to listen to people like open and avowed communists, and socialists and stuff like that. And I was like, holy shit, you guys exist?
Yep.
Like
we out here.
That was my exact experience. I was a lib for the longest time, and I finally like watched one Hassan stream after my husband watched him do the Save the Children rally. And I was like, okay. And then I started watching a lot of YouTube, and now I'm reading Kropotkin. So
hell yeah.
Yeah, I'm sort of slowly going through Capital, volume 1 through 3, right? I read some other literature and listened to the very few leftist academics that do exist and are avowed. I think that one of the big issues for leftists in America is the fact that, no one really knows who we are. They think of us and they think of like libs who like LARP as communists, people that like hammer and sickle stuff, but just don't understand economics or aren't academic in nature. And that's pretty much it. That's kind of how we're thought of. We're dismissed, as this fringe, young, like hippie kind of
you'll grow
era.
out of it.
Yes. Oh my God, my family says that to me. Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've gotten that one. Oh, well, you'll just become like us when you have to pay taxes. Like,
yeah.
Jesus Christ, shut up.
If there's any reading people in chat, I will give you my starting list. Okay, it's literally like they're all short, they're little bitty, and they're all entertaining. Okay, the obvious one, State and Revolution. It's like 200 pages long. It's super short. Why Marx Was Right is a good one, and actually pretty, it breaks down the arguments. Wage, Labor, and Capital, again, itty bitty, by Frederick Engels. Antifa comic book. If you want to know about history of anti-fascist action, this shit is incredible. It's illustrated. And if you don't like the depth of Capital, there's a manga version.
Oh my God.
I didn't know there was a manga version.
That's beautiful.
Dude, what I really like is the Eugene Debs quotes and speeches that he had. Bring it to the United States too. It's pretty cool.
Richard Wolff, unironically, is like one of the best people you can watch. His lectures you can just put on and then go play League of Legends, and you'll be slowly bread pilled over time.
Yeah,
except we're banning League of Legends, though. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, true.
We can't have you playing that. Okay. Same with like Smight and shit like that.
No more MOBAs. Under communism, there will be no more MOBAs.
MOBAs are outlawed.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, as a former Dota 2 player, I can actually support this ban MOBAs.
Excellent. We need your help, Marcus, in the revolution.
Honestly.
There's also economic update with Richard Wolff too. So that's a really good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's good.
Democracy Now! Is very good. I actually, before I got into Twitch, I was just doing interviews for a podcast. I would talk to Garrison Davis, who is a journalist and activist out in Portland during the height of BLM. Interviewed the Democracy Now! People at LSU. Crazy that there's a Democracy Now! Chapter at LSU.
Let's go.
They're everywhere. And I think one of the again, shortcomings of those of us on the anti-capitalist left is that we are not effectively or adequately saying that, yes, we are anti-capitalist, we do exist, and it's normal. This is the normal position. I watched, and I think that's changing because of labor organizing, like we were talking about earlier. I watched on stream a Jubilee video where it was liberal parents talking to conservative teens.
Yeah, that's
and
a good one.
Fucking Cindy, the Cinder Block, was on there telling teens, if you really want to know what the solutions to these are, you have to be ready to accept that it's socialism. You have to be ready to accept that it's not capitalism anymore, that the wheels have fallen off the ship or the vehicle, whatever. We have wheels on our boats now.
Well, it's still such a boogeyman topic. Like,
Yeah.
I briefly mentioned that I was reading Marx as a meme, but also serious. And someone was like, "Are you a communist?"
Yeah.
Stay away from my
Like,
cabinets
those-
and refrigerators.
Those
Goddamn it.
exist still? Those still exist? Like,
Yeah.
it's never worked, dude. And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. Like,
Yeah.
just let it go. It's just a prank, bro. Just move on, please.
Yeah.
I've
I've started to normalize telling people, in casual conversation, if we're talking about politics or something like that, and they talk about like, oh, what do you like? How do you think like, X can get better? And it's like, well, I'm a socialist, so I don't think that like appeasing capital is gonna make things better. Saying it passively and just like not like trying to, preach at people, just literally just throwing it away. And if they want to ask questions, that's perfectly fine. But I found that like that's pretty good. And there are like innate privileges as well that I experience that definitely help with that. Just if you're in a place where you feel safe to talk about stuff, I would say just casually mention it.
Yeah, I had two instances where this happened recently. I've been chatting it up with the guy that owns the vape shop in my town. It's the only place in my entire area that has pride flags out, even before Pride.
Dude,
and
smoke shops are the best.
Yeah, especially now that they have THC gummies. Oh my god! And I
can't relate, but
yeah. But he was asking me like, "What do I do?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm a streamer." He was like, "Oh shit, what games do you play?" And I was like, I don't. I was like, if I want to lose an audience, that's the first thing I'll do. I'll start playing games. But I was like, no, I do politics. And he looked at me and he was like, what kind of politics? And I was like, I'm a leftist. And even that, he was like, what does that mean? And I was like anti-capitalist, like socialist, communist, Marxist. And he was like, oh shit, based. And I was like, oh well, there.
Let's go.
You're not
he was
even
waiting
like.
He was waiting for the. Oh, I love Steven Crowder and Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the NAP, the non-aggression principle. Anyway, that didn't land. Okay.
I'm with you.
But yeah, he was scared of like what someone who openly talks about politics as a job is talking about. Yeah. And because people don't expect like open socialists to be doing any kind of information dissemination or propaganda, whatever you want to call it. And the same thing happened. I was at a birthday party on Saturday, and these are all people that I'm hanging out with who have podcasts. It was very much, that meme of like every podcast has these three dudes. Like it was that. And I was like, well, I do Twitch streaming and I talk openly about politics. And they were like, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, I talk about it through a leftist lens. And they're like,
yeah, still
how? Yeah, a complete disconnect. It's like, how do you? Okay, so you're progressive, so you're like socially liberal. It's like no,
well,
not socially liberal.
I think a lot of people have like the same experience that I did when I realized atheism was a thing. Like their minds have been blocked off from that by society for so long. Like you have not been allowed to think that people don't need to work to survive your entire life as an American. And then you finally get to that point where you're like, okay, I get it. And then it's like everything about you changes. It's insane.
Yeah. I think there's a moment with everybody where they have to stop and think like, hey, is this normal that I have to pay for this? You know, like things that like we all need to survive, you know? And I think the way that I've been breaking the barrier recently is talking about like housing, especially in like California. You know, I grew up in California. I talked to people about it and I said, like, does it seem right to you that like people that I know who have degrees and work 40 hours a week will never be able to afford a house where they grew up in? You know, like, does that seem like a normal system for you? You know, and like 9 out of 10 is like, oh yeah, but that's like California. I was like, okay, what about literally everywhere? Because if we look at housing costs in every city, they are going up across the country. I said, California, you know, is the extreme example, but it will happen everywhere. We have corporate consolidation of housing. So I'm asking like the fundamental question, are you okay with never owning a house, essentially? Like, are you okay with the idea of being a permanent renter? And then they say like, okay, we should do something about that. And it's like, what can you do about that exactly? Because that is just what happens when you privatize like a necessary good. It'll happen with everything. Notice how your groceries go up. Notice how you get priced out of medication. Should people be going bankrupt because they get hurt, because they get sick?
Yeah. Should you not go to the doctor because you don't want to pay for it?
Yeah. Is that
Simply
like,
that.
are these normal things, you know? And like, that's a way that I have found is pretty effective to get through to like normies and essentially get them to reevaluate capitalism.
The only problem with that is a lot of them grew up. I mean, I'm thinking about my parents here, but a lot of like normies I've talked to have usually been older, but a lot of they're younger and they have hope for the future. But it's like they either grew up in a time where they could afford housing or they think that they will be able to later because they'll be in that top 10%.
The temporarily embarrassed millionaire mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're either like temporarily embarrassed millionaires or they already went through being able to afford housing. So I guess whenever I've tried to bring that up, they're like, yeah, well, people should work for nice houses. And they don't really understand that like basics don't fall under the same category as a fucking McMansion. But
yeah, just explaining to people and getting them to accept that it's expensive to be poor. I think if you can get people to understand, like the farther you are distance from poverty, the easier living expenses become. And everyone in America, you know, considering that 50% of us make less than 30,000, and I think the poverty line where it's currently drawn is bullshit. It's unaffordable for everyone. For more than half the country, it's just living is unaffordable. It's one of the reasons that the you were talking about like housing all over the country. It's one of the things that pissed me off about the Hassan house thing. Like, dude, that house here is less than $500,000. It's just because you're distant from it and you're not seeing like the worst aspects of what this system's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like anybody who got mad over that house, it's like you were never in the fucking market for that house in the first place. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't affect you personally. You're just trying to attack someone for no reason when you're not focusing on the right thing in the first place. Like, if you want to address the housing problem, that's not the way to do it. Like, stop hyper focusing on one person's house because you were never going to buy that house. You're never going to be that fucking rich. Stop it.
I think that is also like an argument I get into, even with other like leftists as well, is who we should be really focusing if we want people, you know, like on our side, right? Because the long-term answer is the individual landlord, the mom and pop like landlord, which makes up about 33% of the overall landlords owning like 1 to 2 properties. they're not the majority of your problem.
It's BlackRock.
Yeah, it's these mega corporations, these real estate firms that are buying up the properties. I remember when I looked at the statistics, it was basically 33% of all landlords in the country own 1 to 2 properties. And then it broke the rest down into 2 to 4, 4 to like 8, and then like 10 to 12, right? Those were all in like these tiny little percentages, 2, 4, 6, 8%, right? But then when you got to 150 plus properties, that jumped to 30%. The next largest block of land, like landlords, own 150 plus properties in this country. That is not a healthy model. And that indicates what I'm talking about, which is the phasing out of the individual landlord. That is what's happening. We can all get mad, right, at like, you know, our individual landlord. And yes, they are absolutely like a parasitic class. They don't produce anything. They profit off of the fact that you need to live somewhere. I completely agree with that. But politically speaking, I do think that it is more important to focus on these corporations than these individual landlords as the majority of the problem. Because I think when you just talk about like, oh yeah, every landlord's a fucking parasite, it's like people know landlords. Like their parents are a landlord, or their uncle is a landlord. They don't think of them in these like kind of bad like language terms and stuff like that. So I think that there are ways that we can effectively message without like losing like popular appeal. You know, I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about that though.
I've said it before. I don't think anyone should be able to own more than 3 properties. You know?
I think that's reasonable. I mean, how much house does a motherfucker need?
Well,
I think that's generous, to be honest.
The reason I say that specifically is because I think it's fine if you want to have like a weekend like cabin, you know, out in the countryside. I think that's fine. But specifically, it's for politicians. Politicians have a property in D.C. They have a property in their home state. And some people, this is straight up the Bernie Sanders model. He has a log cabin in the woods. I don't see anything wrong with that because you work out in a different city. If you're, you know, constantly traveling, I think that's fine. But more than 3, it's excessive. And only one of them, I think, should be able to be rented out whenever you're not using it.
It's nuts. Like in San Diego, when I moved in, there's all these signs, you know, everywhere that were like, say no to vacation rentals and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, that's weird. Like, what is that about? And then you kind of like live there and then you realize that like, holy shit, these houses are just empty, man. These people just like own these places and it just completely sucks the community out of these places because people aren't there. They're not voting on like municipal government stuff. They don't care about what happens to the communities. They don't care about what goes on. And then it just ruins everything. There's no kids, there's no families, there's nobody in the streets like actually using it stuff. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a downward spiral, I feel like, in a disconnection with the actual community and the government. And that's what starts this whole problem with democracy.
We need the Red Vienna model.
This reminds me of the town in Texas about a month ago, maybe less, that made it illegal for renters to have more than one person that wasn't directly related.
I think that was Kentucky.
Or was that Kentucky? Sorry, I think so.
I read that. I was astounded. It's like more than 4 people and they have to be related to you or some shit like that.
Yeah. So if you had like, if you and like your partner and then like your like brother and their partner, right, for instance, that couldn't work because one person isn't related to like the main renter or something like that. There's like a way that it works, and it's specifically designed just to make it harder on renters. It's make no mistake, the government is absolutely backing this consolidation of power and this like wealth siphoning. It will only get worse, and so you know it's a good way to radicalize people. I don't know.
I think right now is just like when Trump was elected, now is going to see a time where people are more and more radical in both directions. You're going to see people become, because they feel like it's a dub, become more radicalized to the far right. with these Supreme Court rulings, and you're going to see people who recognize what's happening and become more radicalized to the left. And it goes back to messaging. Are we going to seize that that radicalization and direct it into healthy outcomes like organizing and, you know, people actually grappling with capitalism, or are we going to just let it kind of explode?
I think like one of the biggest problems with the left and for like our messaging and how we don't have like an example of like a city that's like majority leftist or something like that, where it's like visit a city over time, like look at what happened before, and then look what happened after, like how these things change. There's like specific things that we can, you know, city ordinances and stuff like what is it? There's a city that in California that starts with C that did a universal basic income and showed that all of it was like a 3-to-1 economic boom, like huge things like that. And, you know, and it's like I figure we could, you know, I get really frustrated with, you know, like the Green Party, for example, because they are like the biggest third party, but I feel like they're the worst at actually doing stuff, especially when you have like anti-vaxxers like Jill Stein actually running. And I can't believe I voted for her. I'm so embarrassed to admit that, but it's true. Got lured into that. And it's like, I wish people would, you know, support local city council, you know, people that were more radical. Like, for example, the DSA is running people all throughout the country that have, you know, good politics, I feel like, that are actually like trying to engage and build communities. And I don't know, I think we can get like more radical with some of our policies at the local level and see what works, and then have, you know, them as examples for the rest of the country.
Well, you're not going to be able to do like what right wingers want. You're not going to be able to like go with their framing of like name one socialist country that has worked. You can't. There are none. You can only point to cities and policies that have been successful, and even like trial run stuff. So like with housing, Vienna, Barcelona, you can talk about that. Workplace democracy, you would talk about Mondragon in Spain. Nationalizing extraction industries, you talk about Norway. UBI, you talk about the test in the 70s in Dauphin, Canada, how it was a demonstrable success. You want to talk about like climate policies, you talk about like New Zealand and Copenhagen. So we can't just say like, okay, well, this country does it and it works because it's a global capitalist economy. We have to say, here are these policies that are really good. And you notice how they're all like socialist-ish policies, and if we just do that for everything, as if we can see across the board in each, you know, field, they all work out and they're really good. So what if we just did that for everything? What if we just like have a radical change? But that's a hard sell for people.
Yeah,
Compton.
I mean, I think
Compton was the UBI, California.
Oh, it was
Compton.
I didn't know it was Compton. I think it's one of the ways, you know, like you said, to bring up these examples is, through these individual policies and stuff like that. I talk about worker cooperatives a lot on my stream and stuff, and they're hard to start up. So I provide like information about like how to get those going, essentially, and foundations that you can donate to that act as like a bank, because banks are traditionally against worker cooperatives. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Gremlo. Like, finding a place that just is socialist in a global capitalist environment is impossible, right? I think the closest we get to a better system, quote unquote, is like Nordic countries. And those still like rely on profiting off of, slave labor and, extracting good from the rest of the world in the global South. So I think that, but that being said, I do think that we can point to some of the things that those countries do and then say, look, it works. There's no reason why it shouldn't work here. Things that could work everywhere, you know, like I always bring up like McDonald's workers in Denmark, right? Making $21 an hour, and a Big Mac is like 35 cents more expensive. You know, it is not this 1-to-1 ratio of higher worker pay to higher product cost. That's just not true. So like we can bring up those examples as ways of, getting people over as well. Places that do exist that we know, like the happiness index is like much higher than ours, where education is either free or next to free, and they have socialized like medicine. we can point to all these, and like strong unions as well. Like I believe Denmark doesn't even have like a minimum wage.
Nope.
They just have such robust unions that they get to advocate on behalf of the workers. So we can point to those examples and stuff like that.
Aren't
But
they
yeah,
like
you're right.
90% unionized or something, or
think
like
so, yeah.
80?
It's not
And we're
that
like
high, but it's
13.
that they
It's
have
very
a
high.
they have a policy of collective bargaining.
Mm.
Yeah, that's why these countries that you like, they don't have a minimum wage argument never works. It's like, well, they don't have that, but they do have something we don't have.
Yeah, a labor movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 67% in Denmark.
Yeah.
Jesus, that's still crazy. What's it? Can we do a comparative? Like how many businesses are unionized in the United States?
It's 10%.
Is it 10%?
Yeah, it's like 10 or 11%. It's pathetic here.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like 10.68. It bounces.
Jesus Christ.
It's
We've-
going to
we've
shift
seen more.
with
We've seen more.
the next couple of years because we're seeing like more unions.
Yeah.
But as like, let me put it this way: people talk about Venezuela. They bring up Vuvuzela.
No iPhone.
Yeah, as like
iPhone,
an
yeah.
example of like how socialism doesn't work. Venezuela has, I think, a 14% public sector, like that are unionized or working in the public sector that's owned by the state. France has 16. Are you saying that France is more socialist than Vuvuzela by a margin of 2%?
Nah,
you saying that
France is
the-
doing all right.
Yeah. Are you saying that the thing that separates us in America, the capitalist, like, golden arch from socialism is 2%, 4% more public ownership? Is that it?
If only.
Yeah. Inshallah. I mean, hey, that's not that big of a fight, We don't have that much
Yeah.
ahead of us.
Interesting you bring up Venezuela. One of the grad students in my cohort actually immigrated here from Venezuela. And I picked his brain a little bit, like when I first met him, just being like, yeah, like I don't talk to people from Venezuela all the time. Like, what the fuck is it like living in Venezuela? Because we hear all sorts of shit here about what it's like to live there. So like, let me just hear what you have to say. And, I think post Chavez, he was like, yeah, there's been a lot of fucking problems. And you could attribute a lot of that to American destabilization. But, in the Chavez times, he was like, yeah, there were certainly issues, but like people were generally satisfied. Like people were happier then than they are now. So it was just very funny to be like, oh, look, sample size of 1, I get it. But like an actual person from Venezuela was like, yeah, what the fuck are the Americans on about? Like, it's not as bad as they're saying.
Well, I mean, look at
I also hear Russia a lot too, with arguments against communism, socialism.
Well, I mean,
we
that's
have
a
to-
Christian
There's 3
nation
different
theocracy
Russias.
shit. It's like
Or
nutty.
China.
USSR.
Yeah,
And
well,
China,
there's
yeah.
2 USSRs you have to consider. Are we considering Lenin's USSR or are we considering Stalin's USSR? Because
Yep.
we have a agrarian society, pre-industrial, that within 2 decades became a world superpower. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. The same with China. We're talking about less than a century of development, now about to overtake the world's sole superpower. Something is working.
Oh,
And
but
I think the strongest argument for leftist policies and leftist government, unironically, is Cuba. Cuba has been cut off from the world economy for more than half a century, and they're still around. Still have better doctors than we do. They have a lung cancer vaccine. So if a country who is cut off from the world is able to sustain themselves that way, it seems like their model is really good.
but what you're not considering though, Gremlo, is the victims of communism.
Oh, fuck. Dude, yeah, 400 quadrillion dead. I forgot.
No, it's up to 5 now.
Five,
Actually,
oh.
communism is the reason that Mars is uninhabitable now.
Oh, true.
The whole planet of
Yeah,
communists.
Mars sounds like
We
Mao
gave
to me.
everyone nukes, and that was,
Yeah, we,
didn't end well for Mars.
we gave the means of nuke production over to the people.
To the working class.
Yeah, to the
Hell
working
yeah.
class.
Yeah, you go far enough left, you get your nukes back.
It's true. It's true. When people try to tell me that like I want to take their guns, that one's a gem.
Yeah, it's because they've never heard of the SRA before. Yeah, folks, I hate to dip, but I need to get going in a sec.
Yeah, so I guess are we content with cutting it here? Were there any like SCOTUS decisions we wanted to go over sort of in the back end?
Yeah. Glad someone said it. I think we touched on most all of them, at least a little bit. And we also ranted a little bit about, being a leftist in America with no like organized leadership, which is great.
We don't have a bannerman. That's the problem.
They're not going to let us have one.
Ooh, good
We
point.
almost did. They took him away.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think he did wonders though, because like
He
polling,
absolutely, yeah.
polling indicated that people had a much more, or still have a much more favorable view of socialism
He's
after
the most popular senator in the country.
Mhm. Yeah, I do think that that's a thing. But anyway, I also have to go. It is movie night tonight.
Ooh, what are we
Yeah.
watching?
I don't know yet.
Ooh, I've been watching Castlevania, catching up on
Oof, so good.
Ooh,
So
good
good.
shit.
Love that.
We've been
Yeah.
watching Sex Education on Netflix.
Also
that is
great.
a banger of a show. You need to
Really?
watch it if you haven't.
Yeah, I've heard good things.
Mhm.
It's so good.
I think if you like that
Sex
one,
Education.
I'd also recommend End of the Fucking World on Netflix
I've
as well.
seen that pop up, but I haven't actually watched. I'm not usually one for like teen dramas. Like
No,
the
if you
whole
like,
basis of it going in was kind of like, and then it just got really good. Like,
yeah,
really quick.
yeah. I think if you like Sex Education, then yeah, End of the Fucking World is a great one too.
I think
all right.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
sign
no,
off.
no, no,
I'm
no.
I'm gonna
okay.
get
I'm
stuck
okay.
here talking about it because I love this show. But like, I think my favorite part about it is they introduce these characters that are just shallow stereotypes of traditional high school characters that you see in media, and then as the show goes on, they get more and more and more in depth and like reasons for their actions, and like they become super easy to empathize with because you see their fucking home lives and shit, and it's just it's a really good show.
Yeah, 10 out of 10 recommended.
All right, I think with that, let's go ahead and do shout outs so everybody can get to their predetermined cinematic destinations. So, Smight Knight, since you're the guest, go ahead and start us off with the shout outs. Plug your shit.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. I am Smight Knight, he, him historian. If you like my stuff, you can find me at twitch.tv/smite, SMIGHT _KNIGHT. I also have a YouTube channel, which is slowly starting to grow. And you can follow all my socials from my channel as well on Twitter. I promise I'm funny. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this. I don't get to talk academics too often. So any excuses is super fun.
Yeah, and I think that's what's brought at least a little bit of like levity to the side of Twitch is having a more intellectually minded group of people, credentials or otherwise, to actually like discuss things. It's a breath of fresh air, I think, at the very least, compared to some of the other discourse and interviews that have been happening on the platform.
So at least some reassurance that you're not like alone and losing it.
Yeah, I feel that. I definitely feel that.
Amber, reassure me of something else, a particular abbreviation, if you will. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm DN Amber, and you're watching the Disney Channel. The DN stands for D's Nuts. I'm live on Twitch Mondays, Fridays, and on Thursdays, I am here with these lovely people, and I usually play games. Tomorrow, we're playing The True Ingredients, which is a SpongeBob horror game, which I'm super stoked about and is
Ooh.
very on
Interesting
brand
mix.
for me. Yeah, so be there, be square pants.
Jeez.
All right, Grumlow, go ahead, dude.
You guys know who I am. I'm Gremlow, news, politics, React streamer, live pretty much every day at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. Tomorrow we're going to be, covering more news, doing the damn thing. We're very close to hitting partner, and we have an editor now who will be working on our YouTube content so that I can actually, have a presence on that platform instead of just every now and then posting interesting stuff. So yeah, come on by.
Beautiful. Greg, you are last but certainly not least.
I have a YouTube channel. You can get to it by thepeer.review. And I'm out, people. My name's Greg Newkirk. You can check out my publications. You can check out my Twitter now. So I'm really happy to share. Honestly, I'm really proud of my publications and everything. So I was really excited to talk about it. And yeah, man, I'm going to be going through my publications and stuff. So it's going to be fun. Check it out.
Oh my God, that doggy.
Oh, he is.
No one told me there was a doggy.
She's
Very excited.
She was in the other room, and now she's out.
Is it a puggle?
It's a pug something. I don't know. She's a mix of something. Piper, buddy. Jesus.
No remorse.
Oh,
Licks and cuddles now.
I love her.
yes, she is a treasure treat, and I think she wants outside. Go ahead.
Alrighty, well, we could probably go ahead and call it there. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And, of course, it's Smight Knight. If there's any particular topic we're covering for a week, the door is open. So just consider that an open standing invitation. We'll loop you into the ministry Discord so you can be more privy to sort of the behind-the-scenes scheduling. Because we do have actual, academic guests, from outside of the internet who aren't, terminally online. So that also might be interesting to kind of, loop them into, more of the culture with your background as the academic that you are. That's, I think, a nice mix to kind of make them feel a little bit more comfortable on this very strange place called Twitch.
Yeah, you know what? I'm happy to do it. Absolutely. Thank you.
Sweet. Yeah, you'll be hearing from people, and you'll get some Discord invites. So just stay posted, or I'll keep you posted rather. Stay tuned.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take it easy.
Adios. Have a good stream, man.
See y'all later.
See ya.
Later.
Thanks, guys.
All right. I'm going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to go... Okay. We're going to see how this works. 1 second.
Getting lazy and abdicating.
All right, here we go. I'm going to try to join this. Doot. Here we go. Let's see. Sweet. Think this works. Voice chat, test call. Here we go. Oops.
We'll get Greg in here, and before Greg's here, and let me. Oh, for whatever reason, Greg isn't up on the
Here we go.
monitor there. So, there you go. Hey, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So,
hello.
I do want to hear from Greg. I want to say one just quick thing. Let's make sure that we get so that just whoever is there. We go. The active speaker should be in the main window, but I don't see it on there. I wonder why not. All right. So, Greg, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
My pleasure.
Here we
All
go.
right. So, yeah, there we go. So it's just laggy. Don't know why.
No problem.
All right. So my thinking is I think you're right, and I think moral hazard is a concept that is not well understood. I think it's something that we. It's the same thing. I mean, you want to create monsters in children, give them everything they want, and teach them that there's not. And we have the ability to do that now. I mean, we're such a rich country. You can sit there and give your kids anything they want. You can make them live consequence-free lives for the most part, and they are the worst sociopathic human beings you can fathom. So I agree that we have insulated ourselves, and that's what the internet is. You can say and do just about anything you want, reasonably free of consequence, and look what happens. So I agree with that. I just think that we can correct the problem with a better eye towards the future, and B, a slower. I'm for Roberts. I'm for the incremental approach of rolling this back, and my concern is that things are already so dysfunctional. This is going to add to the dysfunction, not.
And that may be the
repair it,
correct approach. I mean, I'm not saying that this all needs to change tomorrow. It may be that the best approach is the incremental approach, because consequences do matter, and I don't like seeing people suffer either. But the only thing I can say is we've kind of done this to ourselves. I hate to say it that way, because I didn't make all of these choices. These are a culmination of choices over the past 100 years or so. And it's like I'm not entirely sure why the amending the Constitution has fallen so out of favor. It's like, I think the Second Amendment should have already been amended. It should have been amended after World War I, probably, and definitely after World War II. It should have been amended. I mean, there's several amendments that should have been done, and anyway, it's an incredibly difficult problem. We've made things so complicated. Everything is so intertwined and interconnected, especially when it comes to federal authority. How do you unwind some of that stuff? It's incredibly difficult. I mean, we've got ourselves in a pretty big pickle, and we're seeing a hell of a lot of problems because of it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so let's pick up on that. Yeah, I want to get Greg. So I wanted to before we have Greg speak, Michael Westby. Greg is way too photogenic. Completely agree. That's why his camera is off. Is because I don't like competing with that kind of. So no, he's not going to be permitted to. We're going to put the shield down on that. So Greg, please, what were you going to say?
I totally agree. I think that we have stopped doing constitutional amendments in this country. I don't know why people. I think it's adding to our political stagnation that it feels like we're constantly having to redo these things. So I'm interested, though. I know I saw you guys do the EPA kind of like on a video, and I guess is that what you guys were just talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So is the idea that so you guys do agree that there should have been some type of like legislation that was passed through Congress in order to specifically target CO2?
Well, I think Xander and I each have a different view on it. Big shocker, but
That's fine.
we agree. I think we agree with the principles. I think we disagree with how to maybe implement them. But that notwithstanding, it's not just the EPA. It's basically everything that SCOTUS has been doing. Is what we've been sort of talking about. But for the EPA, in my view, the EPA. Really got its authority from Congress.
Mm-hmm.
If Congress doesn't like what they're doing or how they're doing it, Congress can revoke it. But it's Congress's job to provide oversight for the EPA. And the EPA was functioning reasonably within how Congress was happy with it. The Supreme Court is saying, no, Congress really cannot have the EPA running around like that. The EPA is not empowered to do that and cannot be empowered by Congress, and has therefore removed it. And in each case, you're not even addressing whether or not we should have those standards, just whether or not they should be implemented by Congress or by the EPA. And then we'll eventually get, could Congress even do that, is going to be the next step. But I think roughly that's where the disagreement lies.
Yeah, we're
If that
not
makes any sense.
we're not disputing or arguing over what the policies actually are.
Mm-hmm.
We're disputing over where the authority is derived to do these things. For example, the Constitution is pretty clear, that the powers of the federal government are limited and enumerated, and nowhere in the Constitution does it enumerate a power under Congress to regulate anything to do with the environment. Ergo, it specifically says if the power isn't directly delegated to the Constitution or prohibited to the state, then the power is specifically prohibited to the U.S. government and reserved for the state or the people respectively. So, Congress doesn't even have the authority constitutionally, as far as I can read of the Constitution. Congress doesn't have the authority to regulate any environmental issues whatsoever, and they've empowered an alphabet agency. That alphabet agency isn't acting upon duly passed legislation and is creating out of whole cloth policies, procedures, and future plans, i.e. moving the country away from fossil fuels and into renewable energy without any kind of legislation passed. So it's like we're not arguing over whether this stuff should be done. We're arguing whether there's actual authority there to do it. My contention is that Congress didn't even have the authority to make the EPA to begin with. It certainly doesn't have the authority to pass any laws about it, and that we need, because I believe that environmental issues are a global, not just countrywide, but global threat, and we shouldn't expect single states to be trying to address these problems. That this is, in fact, an area that should fall under federal government authority, and that we should amend the Constitution to grant Congress the authority explicitly to make regulation and policy in regards to environmental protection. And that the fact that we haven't done that and just let them violate the Constitution to do all of these things, and now the Supreme Court is clawing back a lot of those delegated powers that Congress really didn't have the authority to delegate in the first place. So that's kind of where we're kind of disagreeing on, is whether or not there's actual authority to do this, and what is the best way forward. I say pass a constitutional amendment because I think that the argument for federal authority over environmental policy is warranted, but that it requires a constitutional amendment to grant Congress the authority to legislate. So, and then the alphabet agencies, since they're unelected bureaucrats, can only come up with policy to enforce very specific laws passed by the Congress. And they're not doing that. They're going way above their scope.
I mean,
all right, so let's gather.
So I'm interested in why you think that Congress, even with an explicit legislation in order to curb air pollution, like why wouldn't that be a part of their enumerated constitutional powers?
Because the Constitution doesn't say anything about environmental protection whatsoever, or granting the authority to regulate businesses in that way.
Well, it does say health, though, right? It does. Health is health issues are in fact included. I think I'm trying to remember. I'll look that up in a second. Were you gonna say something, Greg? I'll look it up.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, that's like okay. I mean, I thought that it would be, at least in some aspect of like federal ability to regulate like some type of pollution, that would have to be like in there.
It's not in the.
Yes,
the founding fathers hadn't thought of it.
Well, I mean, it's the Ninth Amendment, right? The Ninth, it's even though it's not explicitly enumerated. I mean, it's like, it's hard to imagine that the Constitution doesn't allow the legislation to stop something that would pollution that would kill everyone in the United States, right? I mean, it's kind of obvious that there would have to be some type of like ability to stop that from happening.
Yeah, to that extreme, like say. Regulation of nuclear waste so that it's not just lying around killing hundreds of people. There's a good argument to be made that, hey, people have the rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and that the federal government that is there specifically to protect the rights of the individuals. Something like that would grossly violate the rights of the individuals. Federal government has the authority to step in and regulate that and to stop that from occurring mass death. It could also be seen as a national security issue. If you kill all of the residents of the country, well, there's nobody there to defend the country or to run the economy. The country ceases to exist. So there are certainly some areas where, I think that we could make very clear delineations to authority of Congress to act on these issues. The Ninth Amendment specifically applies to citizens, not to the governments. It's, as a matter of fact, it's an injunction against governments removing rights from the citizens. So,
but the 10th Amendment, though, does say that the federal government can enact laws for public safety and for relating to public health. So. Would that not fall under then the 10th Amendment, saying that, listen, if the environment goes completely to shit, that in fact the legislator, the U.S. legislative let me just say Congress, that Congress does in fact have that power under the 10th Amendment?
No, Congress doesn't have that power under the 10th Amendment at all, because I think you're misunderstanding what the 10th Amendment is. 10th Amendment is the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the state, or prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or the people. It doesn't say that has nothing to do with public health.
I may have confused that. Let me see if I can find the exact.
I take your point. To provide for the general welfare of the citizens. I mean, that's in the Constitution itself. That's not even an amendment. That's the General Welfare Clause that's grossly abused. That and the Interstate Commerce Clause. But those two clauses in the Constitution setting up congressional authority are grossly abused. The founders thought that we would maintain at least some intelligence in our review of these things, and perhaps didn't take enough time to actually define things. I mean, there's a reason legalese is written the way it is today, because so many people find ways to wiggle their way around what was clearly intended, because you didn't, enumerate things closely enough. But after 240 years, word usage changes as well. This is one of the reasons why I'm very much an originalist interpreter when it comes to law. The law means what it says when it was written, not what usages might have changed in the interim time. This is why I think that the Constitution could have been amended several times to grant Congress the authority, because I agree that there are, like environmental issues. I agree that should be under federal policy. I mean, I agree with you. I may not necessarily always agree with the things that the EPA does, but I agree that we should probably have, congressional oversight, congressional control over these things. When it comes to SEC and dealing with international banks or nationwide banks, it's like there is an argument for interstate commerce that is a legitimate argument, because the banks are now nationalized, or not nationalized. They're national banks across state lines. You're banking across state lines. But it's like we should be doing this the right way. And if we can't get it done the right way, then we need to reevaluate whether there's actually support for it, or if things are just being gummed up. And unfortunately, we have gotten so convoluted. The government does so many things, has become so complicated that there is no easy fix for this. And even though that this is my stated preference to go back to, the size and scope and role that government was initially, federal government, I mean, was initially intended to be, I'm not entirely convinced that that's an actual solution to our long-term problems, because we had a limited federal government once and it led us here. So I'm not sure that clawing back all of this stuff is actually going to help us in the long run.
Sandrine, how do you feel about the EPA, as I understand it, in order to do 111D and all the things that they do under that that's in this West Virginia versus EPA case? I mean, they seem to establish the framework and then allow the states to kind of figure it out by themselves, like how they interpret or enact or figure out the regulatory body kind of by themselves. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that you could do it that way. Say, hey, look, this is the framework that we think is really good. The EPA should be populated by, environmental experts instead of bureaucrats. And unfortunately, a lot of these, I'm not saying there aren't experts in the EPA, but there's a huge number of bureaucrats that are making decisions as well. And, these alphabet agencies should really be comprised of the experts to come up with the best policies for moving forward. But saying, hey, here's our framework. These are our goals. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Give it to the states to pass whatever laws the states need to pass to accomplish those things would be great, until you have a state that says, yeah, I don't buy what you're brewing here. This Kool-Aid just looks a little too tart. And then what do you do? There does, if you're going to get serious about environmental protection, which I think we should, you're going to need the full weight of the federal government behind it in order to enforce the laws. So that's why I think that a constitutional amendment is needed to grant Congress the authority to regulate environmental impacts by business and, in some cases, individuals. But I think giving a framework, saying, "Here, you guys figure out how you're going to, what laws you need to pass to meet these specific goals and the framework that we've laid out." I think that's a great idea, as long as the states comply and do it. But what happens when Wyoming says, "Screw off, we like our coal plants"? There happens to be several coal power plants in Wyoming, and it's like, and we're not shutting them down. And the EPA is like, "Well, we eliminate coal, so why shouldn't What do you do then when a state says, "Yeah, I'm not jiving with any of this"?
So Greg, what are your thoughts on the Supreme Court decision on the EPA?
Yeah, I listened to the oral argument and then I read the decision today, and it's just really frustrating, I guess, like as a scientist, like looking at, there's a lot of different ways that we are impacting the environment negatively, and it's not just pollution, and it just seems frustrating that it seems to deal with like explicitly this idea of the clean power plan that it originally had, and then the EPA kind of like figuring out that they on themselves, they're like, oh, we don't actually have that regulatory power, so then they replace it with the Affordable Clean Energy ACE. And then this is kind of like the whole point of the whole point of the lawsuits. And it seems like Roberts, especially in the oral arguments and stuff, he's just kind of like throwing it back in their face, saying that like, oh, these major questions doctrine, it doesn't fall under that. You're right in the beginning. You didn't have any like regulatory ability, and you don't have any regulatory ability here. So I guess I can kind of understand that, but at the same time, it's odd for me to think that if the EPA exists and the Clean Water Act exists, that we are, and those are legal and allowed to happen, it seemed odd to me that the emissions, it seems very, very tailored into the exact process of the energy turnover, where it's like, okay, we're going to make coal into energy. It seems very narrow-sighted of me to think that like there also wouldn't have any implications on the beginning part, where it's like now it's the mining and how we're obtaining those materials, and then afterwards too, where it's an emissions thing, and that's kind of like where this whole the ACE section comes from, because now it's like, okay, yeah, we're clarifying that CO2 is now a pollutant, and I think Sandring, you're right in that it's not explicitly stated in the the quote unquote like pollutants that even the EPA recognizes itself. So it just seems odd to me that the before and after they wouldn't have any regulatory control, but during they do.
Yeah, I don't like the way that any of this. This isn't the way this works. This is the way that any of this works, or at least it's not supposed to work this way. But because it's worked this way for the past almost 100 years, this is just, it's just slowly slid into this quagmire of a mess. And I think that the justices on the Supreme Court are trying to go back to a more, actual originalist look at the Constitution as to what authority do people or do these organizations actually have. And they're going, well, there actually isn't any authority for any of this stuff. And of course that Nick does have a point. These things have consequences, and that how do you unwind nearly a century's worth of progress to a specific point? It's like things have become so complicated that you want to try and affect one thing. Well, you're going to I'm being attacked by a giant moth. Holy crap! How that are going to affect like 20 other things as well. So and again, people are really mad that Roe versus Wade was overturned, yet it was founded on very shaky reasoning. And when you start doing this stuff like with what the EPA is doing, it's done off of shaky authority, and you're going to end up with this court or that court's going to overturn this or that. It's like the best policy to going forward is to explicitly grant authority for the federal government to be doing this stuff. And then we aren't going to have the Supreme Court saying, hey, you actually can't do this. You don't have the regulatory power in these areas. And the courts tend to stop at the first thing to disprove the argument. So even though you might have 5 different arguments about something, the very first time they come to one that conclusively settles the issue, they stop there. So you don't get an answer for the other 4 things, and you have to wait for another court case to rise that deals with one of those other 4 issues to rise before. Like you're saying, well, they have authority during the conversion, but they don't have it before or after. That seems awfully weird, and that's probably because there hasn't been a case specifically coming up dealing with it before and after. Mm-hmm. I could be incorrect on that. I don't have a lot of time to read, and I didn't have a lot of. I spent all day driving today, and as soon as I stopped, I got sucked into a President Sunday debate, and then so I've not had time to really sit down and dig into all of these things. My big thing was when Nick did the overtime and some of the things that he was talking about, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to disagree with you here, and it's kind of sad because it ends about a 3-month long stint where we were pretty much agreeing with each other
Gross.
over everything.
Disgusting.
And
jeez.
and now suddenly the Supreme Court comes out and actually upholds the constitutional authority or lack of constitutional authority of the EPA to enforce rules, especially that haven't been legislated by Congress. And and I'm like, okay, well, I have thoughts on this. And so he's like, well, I do want to get your thoughts on these kinds of things, and but he didn't have time earlier, so we're doing it now.
So how do you?
So now I'm like jamming a whole bunch of stuff into like one little show where it's like going all over the place, and there's too many things to cover.
Let me say 2 quick things before you answer. Yeah, so we were talking, and I was telling him, look, it's like we should have these rights. These rights are part of it and part of the system, and we already have them. And his reply was, "That's not how the force works." So I'm not going to get addicted to those soundboards because those are really frustrating. But nonetheless, also the Sunday debate, I really wanted to catch, and it was just a nightmare getting ready just for this show, so I missed it. But I will, if Titan happens to have it handy, great. If not, I'll be dropping a link to that debate because it's on a topic that's very important to me, which is, does cancel culture work? Should you do it? What are the bounds? When is it appropriate? Does it backfire? All that. It's a great topic and one that we've been interested in time. Anyways, I'm sorry, Greg. So please continue.
Yeah, it's just like this idea that like there has to be a specific toxic pollutant that's in the legislation in order for it to come up. They talk about this a lot in the Roberts decision and in oral arguments, and it's kind of weird to me because it's like, you know, in science, like what if we discovered a new pollutant that did a bunch more damage than we previously thought, you know, and now we need to curtail this? Or like, for example, does CO2, are we talking about carbon-12 or are we talking about carbon-13? Because they are different. So would we have to pass legislation that somehow would CO2 encompass all of the different types of stuff, you know, all the different carbon dioxides? And on top of that, it's kind of, there's other paths and ways of getting to carbon dioxide too. So it's like you could just burn wastes that created CO2 as an emission. You know, is that like, where is that in this whole thing too now? You know, it's just, it doesn't make, I just hate this idea that it has to be explicitly stated. It makes me feel like as a scientist where every time we pass or publish something, does it need to be passed through legislation now too, to say that this is real, that we accept this, that this is something that's a part of the idea of what the EPA should cover? It just seems very arbitrary, because right now the EPA is kind of, I mean, it's grounded in research science, right? That's where it's kind of like getting where it needs to go and what it needs to do, rather than having to get the okay from the legislation in order to know whether or not the science is settled. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, things can be changing, and it's like every time you come out with something, you know, science comes out with something and says, hey, we've kind of found this, we've observed this, and it's like, yeah, but, you know, the legislation hasn't, you know, Congress hasn't passed legislation authorizing us to have anything to do with this, so we need to pass more legislation. It seems like it's very cumbersome. Instead of empowering the EPA to say, you know, look, this is, you know, we're getting our information from science, we're deriving policy from, you know, the most current science that we have, which would include any of these new things and wouldn't, you know, include to at least what a scientist would be common sense things like, you know, we're talking about carbon dioxide. Well, we mean all of them, you know, instead of having to label each and every what is the term for the differentiation between them?
Isotopes?
I'm forgetting. Yes, between the different isotopes. I swear I listened to a book on chemistry once, and there might have even been a chemistry class in high school. I can't really remember that far back, but so yeah, I mean, but this is one of the reasons why I think that we should pass a constitutional amendment that authorizes Congress to empower the EPA to do those kinds of things. That is the simplest solution. Maybe not the easiest one. You know, Nick has pointed out that we've had difficulty, especially in the last 80 years, passing a constitutional amendment. You know, and you know, it's like we have the American people have the ability to do this if it's important enough to them, and that's kind of where we run into. I mean, it's like trying to get people just to go out and vote at all. You know, it's like less than half the people are voting.
Yeah.
So it's like, how are you going? You know, clearly half the country or half the population couldn't be bothered enough with political policy to actually go and vote, to inform themselves in any way, shape, or form about any of the issues that they care about, and finding the candidates that best represent their, you know, and of course, again, there's a lot of other issues tied into that as well. You know, the problems have been built upon problems, and it's like you want to solve this problem, but there's like 3 other problems that you have to solve in order to make the solution to this problem tenable. So, you know, things get really difficult, really bad, and you know, it's like we need to we need to make things a little more simple. The people need to, the population of the United States as a whole needs to become a little bit more aware of the things that are going on, the issues that are happening, and get more politically involved, and making their voices heard. People who say these are pressing issues that need to be solved, and here's how we solve them.
I agree. I would love. I think people need to get more involved in the democratic process, and I totally agree with you there. For what it's worth, Roberts in his decision does disagree with you, or I don't know if he does. I'm curious about your thoughts here. It's on page 19 for those reading along. Quote, thus in certain extraordinary cases, both separation of power principles and a practical understanding of legislative intent make us, quote, reluctant to read into ambiguous statutory text, end quote, the delegation claimed to be lurking here. And this is my emphasis. To convince us otherwise, something more than a merely plausible textual basis for the agency action is necessary. The agency instead must point to, quote, clear congressional authorization, end quote, for the power it claims. So I'm curious, is Roberts there saying that it needs to be a congressional bill, or is he talking about a legislative, like an actual amendment? It seems like he's talking about a bill that needs to be passed in Congress.
Correct. The way that it would need, that it has to be done now, or in this particular case, he's like, look, Congress has to grant you the authority. So you need to have a congressional bill passed that grants you the specific authority to do these things. And that if you move outside of the scope of the specific congressional authority that does exist, you lose any authority to do anything because you haven't been granted that authority. That is one of the reasons why I'm like, no, we should pass a constitutional amendment. Besides the argument that can be made that Congress doesn't even have the authority to pass any legislation dealing with, with environmental concerns because they weren't ever granted that right. And if you're not explicitly granted the authority to do something, then it is forbidden to you, when it comes to the federal government. So
that's why I find this, like, that's why I find this so disingenuous, is because it's like, yes, he wants them to pass the bill so that can come up before the Supreme Court and he can shoot that down too.
Which would push people in, would essentially say that the only path forward to solve this problem, because we kind of all, most of the country agrees that this is a problem, is to pass the constitutional amendment. And passing the amendment would allow for the kinds of responsive EPA that you would like to see, where we don't have to pass a bill every single time a new potentially harmful gas is found to grant the EPA authority to make policy regarding it.
But he's adding that extra step he's adding an extra step that he knows he's going to shoot down. He knows that in his view, they don't have the right to do that anyway. So he's saying, well, they have to do it. It's on the legislative branch. And I think he's just virtue signaling. It's the same thing, too, when he says, well, we're abdicating.
Very well could be.
Yeah, we're abdicating what we as judges have been doing. We as judges have been doing the legislating, and we're abdicating that. And I was like, yeah, I think there is a tenable argument for that position, but I don't think that's a black and white position. And I just think
nothing's black and white. People have multiple motivations for the things that they do.
I mean, I think that the 1970 bill that actually created the EPA. So this is before the part of the Clean Air Act that which is the 111D, which is kind of like the whole point of the whole lawsuit. But this is the original text that created it in 1970. Quote, the office shall be responsible for the conduct of programs for the definition, prevention, and control of air pollution, having as their objectives, 1, the definition of air quality required to minimize or eliminate deleterious effects of air pollutants, and 2, the achievement of a wholesome air environment through development of air pollution control technology. I don't understand how CO2 and emissions is not already involved there. It seems like the definition of air quality, they're establishing that. And then 2, the achievement of a wholesome air environment, through the development of air pollution control technology. So those are scrubbers, those are emissions reductions, that kind of thing. I mean, it seems, and then on top of that, go ahead.
I believe that one of his again, I haven't had time to really sit down and read everything that's in this, so I'm going off of what a bunch of other people have said, and which probably isn't a particularly wise thing to do, because I'll end up sticking my foot in my mouth at some point if I haven't already. But they're making the point that the Congress doesn't have the ability to delegate that much power. So even though the act founding the EPA says, well, they should be able to do all of these things, one of the arguments against that is they actually don't have the authority to delegate that much power to the EPA. They can't do that. That is something that is held specifically to the legislature and can only be exercised by the legislature. They can't delegate that authority.
I mean, in the conclusion, I think, which is a pretty good synopsis of his. Sorry, I'm just reading a lot of the decision, if that's okay. I like primary sources.
Please
okay, cool.
We actually need the decision read here. So
okay, perfect. Yeah, I love primary sources. So I'm actually on a big oral arguments SCOTUS kick where I'm just like, you guys know that they actually just put that up online, right? You guys, I listen to it all the time now. It's pretty fun. Anyway, so this is the final conclusion, and I think it's a pretty good summary of this Roberts majority decision here. So, quote, capping carbon dioxide emissions at a level that will force a nationwide transition away from the use of coal to generate electricity may be sensible, quote, solution to the crisis of the day, end quote. But it's not plausible that Congress gave EPA the authority to adopt on its own such a regulatory scheme in Section 111D. A decision of such magnitude and consequence rests with Congress itself or an agency acting pursuant to a clear delegation from the representative body. The judgment of the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia is reversed, and the case are remanded for the proceedings consistent with the opinion. So I think that's pretty much what you're saying, Sandring. It's it needs its own a decision of such a magnitude and consequence rests with Congress itself. They're not specifically saying it has to be a constitutional amendment, which I think is interesting. It has specifically to do with.
They're not
concerns me.
Right.
They believe that, but they're not saying it.
Yeah.
Right. They're not saying that right now because they didn't get that far.
Mm-hmm.
So now the next case that comes up where Congress says, okay, fine, we're going to specifically legislate and give them very specific legislative authority to do these specific things. Then it's going to be brought into the court. Somebody's going to sue them again.
Mm-hmm.
Ends up back at the Supreme Court, assuming it gets that far. And then they're going to come out, and this is the concern that Nick has. They're going to say, well, Congress doesn't have any authority to be regulating any of this stuff anyway, so we're going to overturn all this stuff. And that's what at which point you would have to have a constitutional amendment. That's the only way forward at that point, or wait for a future court to decide, hey, we're going to allow a more liberal interpretation here and let them do it again and overturn this decision. So
and let me quickly dovetail this with where they had a legit point with the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the problems was that the SEC, and this was the problem they highlighted. Now, this is what they've been doing, which is what really irks me, which is they've been, in my view, talking out of both sides of their mouth. They did this with the SEC. They certainly did this, in my view, with the Casey decision. But the argument was, look, the SEC is, and this argument was like a couple of paragraphs, and then the rest was on the groundwork for overthrowing the authority of EPA and all the others. But for what they said was unique about the SEC was that it had its own judges, it had its own enforcement abilities. So what would happen is if you violated SEC regulations, you could go to jail, even though they weren't a part of, the code of the legal code of the United States. You violated a regulatory commissions, and you could only appeal to the SEC. You couldn't appeal through the regular court system because you hadn't even been convicted of a crime in that. Now, there have to be exceptions because people are brought on by the SEC, so I'd have to go back and look at it. But that was essentially that they have their own justice system, their own judges, their own laws and there's really no way to appeal it. And that made a lot of sense to me. I was like, okay, that's a serious problem. So that's what made the SEC unique, and why their decision on the SEC could not be applied to stuff like the EPA and so on and so forth. But then they gave pages upon pages upon pages of why all of those agencies have to be curtailed. And then they applied that exact same reasoning to the EPA, which is, it's not just whether or not they have enforcement powers, which the EPA does have, but it's also whether or not they are acting within the most narrow defined scope of powers, such that you can guarantee they are not legislating. So there's almost no difference in this view between a legislation and regulation. They're the same thing, essentially, to this court that I can tell. And I agree that the EPA should not be making laws. I agree that they, at least the SEC, had no higher authority. The SEC, you have to have. 2008 is a great example, and I think it's an existential threat to not be properly regulating these things, but it's all of a sudden a lot harder. As I think you were going to say something, Greg, and then
I feel like it is narrow, though. I mean, that's what's crazy. I feel like they aren't overstepping like what Congress is allowing them here, I guess. I mean, especially considering, I mean, the whole point of this was to reduce coal-fired electricity generation from 38% to 27% over 16 years. I mean, and on top of that, they're establishing a cap and trade system where, coal-fired power plants that were deficient are allowed to trade their credits back and forth to better ones. You know, it seems like this was like the moderate position and the incremental approach to this thing. They could have said 0%, right? They could have said no coal-fired power plants and put them out of business. But the whole point that these power plants are making, especially in the oral arguments, is that it's so like financially onerous on us that there's no way that we can possibly pay for this. So, which I think it's just ridiculous. I mean, they're talking about billions of dollars that's going to be needed to invest into these old power plants. But I mean, the United States electricity industry, and during this time, I mean, we're talking about $387 billion a year, and they're complaining about a couple $1 billion. It just doesn't seem like it's that onerous.
Well, and then what happens when we make a treaty that says we as a country will cap our emissions to a certain level, and the other countries abide by their end of the treaty? We expect them to, but now we've got a problem, which is without passing some form of constitutional amendment that either explicitly follows that treaty or more generally empowers either Congress or somebody else to act on that treaty. It seems to me, as Andrew's made a point, and he's absolutely correct on this. It's one that, as a history teacher, is very hard to explain to people. But the process was deliberately designed to slow things down. It was deliberately designed to slow things down for any number of reasons, but in the largest sense, so that we wouldn't make rapid changes that would then have to be unmade. That would be a very, very deliberative process. But it just seems to me that it makes it so slow that we will not be able to function in a global economy anymore, and I think that would be very detrimental to us.
Well, Paris is non-binding, right? I mean, the Paris Climate Accord, which you're talking about. We're actually, and actually, because coal is so inefficient and so expensive, and the expansion of horizontal fracking across the United States, like we were actually hitting the numbers 10 years in advance of those numbers. So it's like it wasn't even a federal requirement that actually did that. So it just seems like a lot of states are purposefully dragging their heels. So if you go to compared to California, which is, I mean, let's just be honest, it's a first world nation basically, operating as a state. Okay, California has 63% of carbon-free electricity sources. So that's renewables, hydro, and nuclear, right? All together. The United States entirely, all together, with California included, 19%. So it seems like there are states that are purposefully dragging their heels in regards to making this transition, and the Roberts majority decisions basically saying like, oh, the EPA is causing all of this change to happen, and it's not fair, and it's like, it seems like the entire world is going in this direction, and it's just specific states in the United States specifically that are dragging their heels.
I think you've got a good point, but I do want to and I'm just going to say this so we don't have to go into the entire thing again, but I think one of the things that Isandering, when Isandering first started talking about abortion, he is pro-choice, but believed that this decision, the conclusion had been reached basically by the wrong means. So the argument was faulty. He believed in the conclusion, just not the argument. Mm-hmm. So it's the fallacy. Just because somebody's got a bad argument doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means the argument's bad. Mm-hmm. And I think just to sort of try to as quickly as possible, not encapsulate, but summarize the position. I think Isandering seems to me, and he's going to correct me if I'm wrong. He'll probably correct me even if I'm right, to be quite honest. I think that his position is you're right about all of these arguments as to it's individual states who are screwing with the process, probably because it is cheaper, and screw the environment or screw other people. But the problem is the way the Constitution is written. Until we follow a very specific process, they are empowered to do that, mm-hmm. and that in and of itself is a value. The value of those states being able to have the right to operate a certain way until there is a constitutional amendment, and there's a very deliberate reason for that. So,
even Roberts disagrees with that, though. It doesn't need a constitutional amendment, and we have a democratic process where those states could actually undo the Clean Water Act. They could vote out the EPA. We have those mechanisms for them to have stopped this, but they're unable to convince people.
I will say this: I don't think Roberts disagrees with that. I think he made another argument, and the fact that I think Isandering would agree with me that Roberts thinks it has to be a constitutional amendment. If you get both Isandering and I believing in that,
okay,
that we're coming at Roberts from both of us. So is that fair, Isandering?
Yes.
Yeah, Roberts does, I think, believe you need a constitutional amendment, but he didn't make that argument. Now, as Andring was suggesting, the reason he didn't make the argument is he didn't have to. Mm-hmm. He was erring on the shorter part, which is what they should have done was do this in legislation. I think that's disingenuous because he doesn't believe that's what they should have done. He knows that's not what they should have done, and that's mm-hmm. what he's going to say when they bring it up. So that's not what he should have done. So he's actually lying, in my view, when he says that's what they should have done, because that's not his view. And that's not the argument. The argument is they weren't empowered to do it in the first place. But he's taking that extra step because I think he's trying his best not to telegraph just how far he wants to go with this. And that was what the concurrent opinion by Thomas did, which is, by the way, why I think it was Thomas's wife who leaked the original decision.
Interesting.
I think Thomas's wife, Ginny, leaked the Alito decision. I think she leaked it because she was trying to cement it and move progress forward, and because she was so giddy with anticipation of where it was coming. And I think Thomas just did the exact same thing when he did his concurrent. I have to believe Alito was like, you did not just telegraph mm-hmm. Which anybody who was paying attention already knew.
True.
But yeah. And is Andrew, any thoughts?
Too many thoughts jumbling around in my head. I mean, it's just, we find ourselves in a mess, and part of the mess is because the federal government is doing too many things. Part of the mess is because there's not enough engagement with the citizenry of the United States. They don't seem to care enough to find the time to go vote, or to find the time to and I get it. People are dealing with problems, but there's plenty of people that, I mean, this is kind of important. It's the future of our country. You should probably get involved in that, and or at least completely shut up. If you're not going to bother the vote, you completely shut up about complaining about anything, because you didn't. If you're
working at minimum wage and you try to take the day off, you can get fired for that. If you've got a child, there is there's a large swath of this population. I agree with you 100% that are just like, oh, no, I can't vote because of X, Y, but there's also a lot that for practical reasons can't do it. We're one of the few countries that don't have it as a holiday. So I'm just going to point that out on that. I think there are legit complications that this country needs. I
can absolutely agree with that.
I just don't want you to be called a bastard again, is all I'm saying. I'm just trying to avoid that.
You're not going to stop that because there are too many people that are like, my views on, the Constitution should be interpreted to mean what it meant when it was written, instead of what we want it to mean today, because of different things like word usages changing and things like that. And there's a great many of people that disagree with me on that. They're just like, no, it shouldn't be. Look at all of the bad consequences that might derive from that. It's like, well, we kind of dug ourselves into these holes, and we've allowed the collective we over the generations, not specifically our generations necessarily that caused the problem, but we're going to suffer for it. And maybe that suffering. I'm not saying that. I am not saying this is true. I'm saying that maybe this suffering is what is needed, is to get enough people motivated to be into our system to actually fix some of these problems, instead of, and not standing for gridlock, actually start moving the process along. And there's a good argument to be made that, the process may be a bit too onerous and maybe a bit too slow to be able to respond to, modern issues. And again, that should possibly be changed. There's definitely good arguments for many of these things, and I'm not necessarily against any of those things. I think that we should have a good discussion about how do we really solve this thing. The problem is that the problems generally are so complex and so intertwined with so many other problems that we've built ourselves quite a huge mess here, and it's going to be difficult finding a good solution moving forward that doesn't undermine the rule of law. That is a very important thing for civilization to function.
Yeah, I mean, it is
on
weird.
A societal level.
It is odd for me, like, Kagan has talked a lot in the oral arguments about like the energy markets and all that kind of stuff, and it's just like, dang, man. I mean, before fossil fuels, I mean, do you guys know where we were getting the majority of our oil from? This is kind of crazy.
I don't.
Whales.
I should have known that.
In order to fund the kerosene and stuff, in order to the lamps and all that kind of stuff, we were killing whales. So if there was some way that the whales became cheaper than fracking or anything else, and there's this crazy rush to eliminate all the whales in the entire world, it's just odd for me to think. I don't know. It's weird for me to think that the EPA wouldn't have any say in that and being like, guys, like, let's, it's just odd to me. I don't know. I hate it. But Sandring, I totally agree with you, man, in that, like, people forget that it's actually democracy that is the more radical political position. And it's very basal, elementary politics of just, I'm going to tell you what you're going to do, and you're going to believe what I tell you you're going to believe. And there's always this rush to authoritarianism whenever there's something wrong with democracy. And, it's the time that something doesn't happen that you don't like to get more involved rather than less. The people that are saying, I'm never going to vote again because SCOTUS doesn't do something that I want. I mean, that's just not the answer, right? And there are municipal governments, states that you can have like a big impact on, and those are going to be more like, one, radical in your types of politics, and then two, they're going to be changing more often. So there's a lot of states that, for example, passed these anti-Roe legislation. So as soon as Roe was repealed and abortion was banned, but a lot of these states are 50-50 right now on whether or not they accept abortion or not. And some of them even have blue governors. So I think that there actually is a possibility in a lot of these states coming forward that we could see some expansion of abortion rights. I don't see, the Roe going back for probably decades at this point, but it is possible. I feel like it is a reality. And interestingly enough, there are some Republican states that have a Republican governor, state house, and legislator that have not banned abortion, which is Alaska, because there's a constitutional amendment in place, and New Hampshire. And New Hampshire in 97, I think, voted down their abortion ban. So it goes to show you that, like Alaska, for example, like people did good work to put rights they felt like were needed into state constitutions, and now the Republicans have power there. They can't just roll it back just like that. You know, it's California right now putting reproductive rights on the ballot and codifying it into their state constitutions. So there is good work still being done.
So let me interrupt real quick. There was a question in the live chat about Shin versus Ramirez. We have not covered that yet. We've covered that in a previous show, and there was an element of nuance that we had talked about, and now I'm kind of forgetting what it is, and I'm starting to fade a bit. So I don't know if anyone else wanted to discuss that while we're here. That is the one where if your attorney did not bring potentially exculpatory evidence during the trial, did not bring that out, so there was a failure of your attorney, do you have the right to an appeal? And the decision, if I recall, and I'm trying to remember this nuanced position, had something to do with they're not actually per se denying the right to an appeal. They're denying the right to an appeal at a federal level, and saying you can still appeal it in the state if the state lets you, but the state doesn't necessarily have to let you either. So there was nuance to the decision, but I don't remember it well enough right now. I've got too many in my head, so I don't know if anyone else has anything they wanted to say on that.
Is this the Miranda one?
That's one that I.
No.
No, it's.
We covered it. I don't even remember.
Yeah, Shin versus Ramirez, where they're saying you don't have the ability to, or you don't have the right to appeal, make a federal appeal based off of incompetent defense. Legal defense,
and it's roughly the same argument. There are definitely different. So it's not the same argument. It's not actually, that was poorly spoken. It's not the same argument. It's the same ideology, which is it's left to the state. If the state wants to accept an appeal based on that, fine. But you do not have a right to a federal appeal because your state screwed it up, essentially, because your state is not allowing you to appeal because you've been convicted, even though there's no. It's like, no, that's up to your state. That's your state administering the justice, not the federal government. It is not their job to be a source of appeal just because you don't like the fact that your state isn't letting you present new evidence, is essentially the argument, if I recall it correctly.
Yeah, and I want to go through and actually read that one, because that one's going to be. You're going to have to take a very close look at it and make sure that you get the elements correct on it to find out what exactly is being said. And most criminal law is state anyway. I mean, like murder the states are the ones that prosecute murder charges. So it's just it can be. Yeah, that's one that I'm going on the surface. It seems like a really, really bad thing and was decided incorrectly, but I don't know what the actual arguments being made are, and I want to read that one and get more information.
Well, so let me, and I think we're going to start wrapping up. I want to hear from everybody before we bail, but I did want to point out too that it's part of my concern about how quickly this is being done. If all of these mistakes were made over so long, and if we've already talked about the importance of government moving reasonably slowly, I think you have to roll these back slowly, if for no other reason than I think we're closer to a revolution than we've ever been. And I don't think poking the bear is necessarily a great idea. If Miranda, Gideon, Loving, maybe even, again, because this was the point that I made, and this is one of the reasons I'm so triggered, is the arguments that they're using applies to the Dred Scott decision. The Dred Scott decision was decided correctly based on the logic that I'm seeing, unless I've missed something, and I've gone over both of the arguments. So if we're rolling all the way back, not because you don't have those rights, but because they had been decided. The method by which they were decided was inappropriate. The problem is we've now got the idea that because it's the legislators in the state that determine how the election is done, the again, a very narrow interpretation that's being thrown at this court, and this court has said they're going to look at is, well, gee, doesn't that mean then that they decide? There's no oversight from judges. There's no oversight from the governor. It's up to them. And if you don't like how they did it, then vote somebody else into office. The problem is if they control the elections, which is explicitly why the federal government doesn't control the election for president, you may not be able to do that. That's why gerrymandering has to be able to be brought to the Supreme Court. But it looks to me like what this court is going to do is say, no, gerrymandering is a state's issue. If you think it's gerrymandered and you think gerrymandering is morally wrong, your state needs to fix it. The problem is there's absolutely no way to do that without the protection of the Supreme Court. You can't do that because they could just gerrymander your vote out of existence. So there is so much abdication of the federal government so rapidly on so many rights. If they actually do overturn Gideon, if they overturn if they decide that they will not in the future hear gerrymandering or any cases that have to do, and we don't know how they're going to answer that. I can't predict. I can predict how they're going to answer on a lot of these coming cases. I don't know how they're going to predict on that one. So it's unfair to say they will do it. But I think it's unfair to say, too, that it's not a distinct possibility that they'll do it. How does this country recover? It's gone too far, too quickly by that point, and I don't know, if at that point I don't even really have the right to vote anymore, because my state gets to determine how I vote. It even gets to determine who I vote for. I think we're done, and I think we're headed in that direction awfully quickly, and I could try to say that my rights were infringed upon. But if Gideon is gone, how am I going to do that unless I've got $1 million?
I think that's a really good point. I mean, Breyer and the Dobbins Dissent writes, he's quoting his book, The Breaking the Promise of Brown, the Resegregation of America's Schools. Quote, "It is not often in the law that so few have so quickly changed so much."
I think it's dangerous to go this quickly. I think it's going to yield unprecedented, unpredictable results. And if the goal is that the results are, you say, wow, this is really terrible, we need to overhaul Congress, and you vote for a new congressman, then maybe it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. I think it is going to have some of that impact, but I think the impact is going to be a lot more sideways and in a lot of other directions that I think the government was explicitly not supposed to work that fast, even if you're correcting mistakes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is what Roberts talks about in his concurrence in Dobbs. Yeah. He's saying, he's like, wow, this is crazy that they're talking about Roe and Casey. About Heller. Sorry, I've got no cases. Been real law. But yeah, I mean, the fact that everything is so sweeping and so big and so and it's the first cases that this new majority sees, and the first case out of the start are these huge cases and these huge game-breaking precedents that are overhauled, and it's just it's crazy. I mean, we really have to think why so quickly. And why these cases, and why so sweeping?
You've got a very good point. You've got a very good point about the founders specifically set things up to run fairly slowly, so that you didn't get swept up into a populist movement. The reverse could hold true as well. I mean, you wanted these things to be done slowly so that you don't have overwhelming change so fast that it just tears the system apart. Well, the reverse would also be true. I mean, that's an incredibly good point. Even if you're trying to fix problems, moving so fast with overwhelming changes, risks tearing everything apart. It's like So, you have to be measured in the things that you do. You need to be measured in the, when you're legislating things, and you need to, and if mistakes are made, because mistakes will be made that need to be corrected. But even if you're trying to fix the mistakes, you still, you don't want to overwhelm the system with change or things start collapsing. So, it's a very good point that people need to bear in mind. And I think that, the kind of ideal that's gripped the new Supreme Court is strike while the iron is hot. And, there's works great for
It's a lot of striking, though.
Yeah, a lot of works great for
there's
blacksmiths.
A lot of striking going on. Yeah.
So
not so much for government.
I have like this idea I've been mulling around, and I when I'm listening to the EPA argument and reading the decision, and I'm came into the shocking realization that these people have no idea what they're talking about in regards to ecology or the environment. And when I'm listening to Scalia and Heller 2008 and the oral arguments, he's making these great arguments to 1658 English common law on the basis of the Second Amendment. And I don't agree with him, but he's making really foundational claims, and it's an interesting thought process. And I can agree with that, but I don't agree with his conclusions, but it's an interesting, case that he's making. And when I'm listening to the EPA arguments, these people are talking about the ecology and these energy markets, and they're not economists. They're not scientists. It's very weird to me. And it doesn't seem to me like the founders of the Constitution would create a system where lawyers ruled on high and told us what everything was, right? It's just, lawyers are entirely optional. You actually don't need a lawyer to represent yourself in the Justice Department, in the justice system. You can represent yourself. So it just doesn't seem to me like they would create a ruling class of lawyers. And if the SCOTUS is going to make these huge, grand, sweeping changes on the environment, why not have a scientist on there? Why not have a medical doctor that's, helping decide the road decisions, that kind of thing? There is no restriction on only lawyers being on SCOTUS. It could be anyone that the Senate agrees to. So how about diversifying SCOTUS and bringing in different backgrounds? It would help creating some of these decisions to be a little more understandable, in common parlance, and the more people could understand them. And I feel like just having a better background would give people a better understanding of it. Because when I'm listening to this, only Breyer is bringing any data or statistics or anything else, and I'm like, I'm really gonna miss this. I'm gonna miss someone bringing up data. So I don't know. What do you guys think about diversifying SCOTUS and backgrounds and bringing having more than lawyers on there?
I'll let Xandring. Yeah.
I'm not directly opposed to it. I mean, there's some concerns about it too, but I'm not. I mean, in principle, I'm not opposed to it.
I think where I thought Xandring was going to go with this, and I suspect this is at least part of his thinking, is too, that was actually originally the idea, right? I mean, you were really not supposed to be a lifelong politician. People in Congress were supposed to be bankers, farmers, lawyers, run the gamut. That was the idea. The problem is, okay, hold 1 second, please. Oh, one of these days I'll get over that cough. The problem is, the world has become much more complicated than that kind of system can rely on. Even just how we get our information now has become so, it's a landmine. What news sources do you watch? How do you know that those news sources are good? Well, how do you know that what they're relying on is good? And it's so difficult to process just the day-to-day information to function, let alone what you need to make good decisions on environmental protection or any of these things. I was thinking about this one. I've heard scientists, and we've heard scientists. One of my favorites is because I used to do the anti-theism thing, and so I had found scientists, PhDs, who said that they highly questioned whether or not evolution was real. Their PhDs were always in physics or something else that's a completely different, by the way. I've never seen a biologist say that, but nonetheless, you could find scientists who have legit PhDs who have said that. And that if you really look at the full text, you'll also see they'll say, well, yeah, but it's considered scientifically sound, so I'm not going to argue against it, but I don't believe it, and I haven't seen it. So even then, they're not quite thinking, they're not really saying it's not true. They're just saying, they're admitting they're not qualified to say it's not true. They just don't believe it. Okay, so what that means is, especially when you got super PACs money and all of these things that we all know about, and I take forever for me to get into, you can have a extreme minority position that is well funded that can put forward evidence in the name of a scientist or something like that that's making any claim you want. You will find somebody who can make that claim, and you can have mountains of other data. And if the people who are in office aren't paying attention or aren't qualified, the amount of things that they're going through. But nowadays, it does have to be lawyers. I don't think it was intended to be, but nowadays it has to be because there's so much minutia and the single misstep. Even the correct steps have consequences. That's actually essentially what we've been talking about, right? Which is, even if you're making the correct decision, if you made it for the wrong reasons, it has all of these consequences that echo for generations. So it's sort of like most of us aren't qualified to do that kind of thing anymore, which was not the intent, but I don't know how you get around that given the complexities. And I think you're going to get more and more layers of complexity. It reminds me of the lemon laws, which when the lemon laws first came out, fierce opposition to it because they're like, no, you're responsible to do the due diligence and know that what you're buying when it comes to a vehicle is good. And it's like, well, wait a minute. When you were buying a cart, the horse-drawn carriage, you could be reasonably expected to have enough familiarity to be able to look over it and have some idea as to whether or not it was good or not. But an engine is so complicated, a car is so complicated, the due diligence required to make an informed decision when buying a car is virtually prohibitive. You'd have to borrow the car for a while. You'd have to take it to a mechanic's shop, assuming that you don't trust the mechanic and want to do the due diligence yourself. You'd have to know so much about mechanics, and then computers, same thing. People are getting ripped off with computers all the time. So it's just gotten so complicated that we're just adding layer after layer after layer, and I don't know how to undo that. Everybody has to be more and more specialized, and the jobs of Congress has to be more specialized. I agree with you in principle. I don't want lawyers there. I certainly don't want professional politicians. I think it's a huge problem, but the universe has gotten so complicated. I don't see a practical way of really rolling that back with anything short of term limits, and that may help, but I don't think that'll solve the problem.
Well, and it can create more problems too. I mean, there's some good arguments for things like term limits, and then, and of course the arguments always boil down to, it's like, well, when you get good people in, you kind of want to keep them there, and term limits would hurt you in that respect. I mean, it's like you're getting this unexpected grab bag of stuff all the time, and even if you're getting some bad that's getting stuck in there forever, I mean, you can at least make plans, and you can at least have some sort of stability in what's coming next, and it creates problems as well as solves problems.
Well, there's the argument that I really like, actually. It's a great argument. We already do have term limits. They're called elections.
Yeah, exactly. I don't agree with anything that limits basically like a free and fair election. You should be able to beat an 85-year-old at the polls, man. Like, I'm sorry, but like it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, even if it's an incumbent, you should be able to beat them through democracy. And the presidential term limits have created this kind of weird thing where now Congress actually has like more power than the president, and like I would argue Pelosi or McConnell actually have more power, especially McConnell, because he's decided.
Yeah, McConnell's proven.
He's decided the SCOTUS, right? Please. So and even now the federal judges and stuff. So he has more power than a president because he's been there for so long. He's able to withstand multiple presidents and actually have a generational power that Obama never had, right? Even as a 2-term president, he didn't have that long of an impact on our politics. And so I don't. It's kind of an odd thing, and I don't really agree with having term limits for SCOTUS either. I guess it's supposed to be the oligarchical branch of our government. It's people that are complaining about it. It's kind of like one of those things where we had a chance in 2016. Could have gone 3 the other way. Could have been, the next 45 years of a liberal Supreme Court, but that's not what happened. And it is odd that the Supreme Court's only been liberal on the liberal wing for 45 years out of the 245 years of our country, which is a little odd, but it's, the Warren Court is going to be rare, right? I don't know. It's just kind of, it is frustrating. And I do kind of agree with you guys. They're like, kind of like when I came in, like, it does feel like SCOTUS is being more and more broad and, I don't think that legislation should happen through SCOTUS, right? And that's kind of like the whole point of Congress and having representative democracies and that kind of thing. I do really wonder when the next majority is going to happen after, stare decisis has been thrown to the wind with Roe. I wouldn't expect the next radical liberal SCOTUS to care about stare decisis on a lot of this stuff. Let's just say that. I don't think that they're going to really care. So it's going to be really, I think the clapback's going to be pretty hard.
There's a slim possibility the court will be liberal again by the end of the year. And I think the reason is because, here's why. Let's assume one conservative justice goes down, either COVID, health issues, something like that. One of them, and it's not Thomas. It can't be Thomas. If it's Thomas, it's not going to happen. But let's assume that one of them goes down for some reason, and it happens. I think Thomas is going to be either impeached or resign before the end of the year. I think that's a very strong possibility because he should have recused himself in the Eastman case. He's decided 9 cases in which his wife had a conflict of interest that he did not reveal. And I think if we learn more about her participation in the January 6th, and he's decided January 6th cases, he was the sole dissent on the Eastman case, which was about releasing documents, which it turned out had private messages. They contained private messages that implicated his wife in a crime.
Yeah, she was taking money to pay for the coup from the Venmo that he has on his SCOTUS account. Like, what?
I think now Roberts is one of the most ineffectual. I shouldn't say that because we've had a lot of, but I mean, he's not
he's asking questions
in
now.
Recent history,
it's crazy.
He is. And I think the problem is he's been called out by other judges as being just a terrible Chief Justice, and he's losing control of the court. I was sitting there going, why didn't he vote on Casey? It's like, why didn't, and I was calling him a coward for not voting on Casey. And then I realized I think the reason he didn't vote on Casey is because I think he would have voted to strike Roe v. Wade. But I think this is going too fast for him. And I think he's concerned. So he decided not to vote because he doesn't think it should be progressing this way. Okay, that's fine. Then he needs to step up somehow. I'm wondering if there's a slip of the tongue. If Thomas brings too much, and yes, I did call him Uncle Tom in the last stream. I stand by that. I was wearing I'm sitting there going, if I'm going to say that about a Supreme Court justice, I'm going to wear a suit and tie. $400 suit, $400 tie. I doubled the cost of the show that day. But nonetheless, this is
why my salary is where it is.
It is. Well, production values. I'm just saying it's important. So if I think, and if Titan brought something up earlier, which I think is true, I really do think it was Ginny who released it. If it wasn't Ginny, it was a liberal. It was absolutely, because liberals gained more, but I think it was Ginny Thomas who released the Alito thing. That utterly decimated the court's ability to operate, because now everybody is second guessing everybody else. Nobody trusts anybody. And this institution, which has been the most secretive of all the institutions, is the U.S. Supreme Court. And all that's been destroyed. It's been destroyed on Roberts's watch. If it was destroyed by Thomas's wife, and if Thomas is now, sending out these concurrent opinions, which in my view, Roberts may share it, but he's pissing on Roberts's shoes. And I think Roberts may well reach the point where, and what Titan had pointed out, and I thought this was worthwhile, is we don't know who did the leak. Why not? It's possible because they didn't find the person, but they investigated it, I think, pretty hard. I think it's 50-50. They didn't figure out who did it, or they didn't have enough to say who did it. They may know, but they can't, and they're not going to say without proof. Or it was Ginny Thomas, and they don't want to implicate the wife of a Supreme Court justice, and so they're sitting on it. If it's that, it'll come out. It may take years, but it'll come out. And I think Roberts is going to act on that. I think he's going to feel he's got no choice. So if we lose a conservative judge through COVID, retiring, any number of things, and that's reasonably small. It does happen. The chances of that are reasonably small. But if that happens, I think the chances that Thomas doesn't make it through the end of the year are high. You'd lose 2 justices while Biden's in office. I'm not saying bank on it. I'm not saying be optimistic, but I am saying it's a non-trivial possibility. It's a non-trivial possibility is what I'm saying. That's the argument. All right. So, Greg, any final thoughts as we choose to wrap this up? Thank you so much for coming in. This is delightful. I'm going to confess something. Oh, no. You had said you wanted to talk about the EPA when you came in. And I was just like, well, it's an open hang. So, Greg, come on in. But I was just like, oh, God, we're going to have a science geek. He's going to come on. He's going to talk about the Supreme Court. And, by the way, what does SCOTUS stand for? But that judge guy who said the thing about the EPA, and I really don't like it when you say that about that. I was just like, oh, God, I would love to have you on. You really knew what you were talking about. You had all this. I was like,
oh, thank you.
Oh, he got game. We can't bring you back. You look better than me. We've had 3 people say that so far in the live chat.
I'm done. I don't have any more.
In terms of,
I gave you all. I gave you everything that I have.
Okay. All right. So, so that was no. Thank you so much for coming on. You contributed spectacularly, and now because of my train of thought is completely shot. I did ask if there was anything else you wanted to say.
Yeah.
You seemed to say, was there anything else you wanted to, and certainly at least tell people where they can find you. But if you have any closing thoughts on this,
yeah, I mean, I obviously, if you care about the environment and you want to minimize our impact on the environment, I think that the decision is, very sad, but there are ways to get involved and have a huge impact on the environment. And you actually can do it through making our environment just basically conserve more species. So the ones that are dying off right now, you conserve what's here and rehabilitate the ones that are gone. And you can do that by, for example, going to your municipal governments, looking at even the zoning board commissions actually have a huge impact on creating big spaces of nature, because right now a lot of it is archipelagos, the islands of nature as opposed to one connected mass, and that has a big impact on biodiversity, and that's what we want. So check out your municipal governments. There's zoning boards and commissions that are actually unelected, so you can go in and just kind of talk to your city council member and see if they have an opening, and they usually, it matters how your municipal government happens and all that kind of stuff, but check it out for real. And there's a lot of ways at the state level too that you can do a lot to impact climate change and just in general the impact the humans are having on the environment. So don't be distressed. Try to create some action out of your frustration and change things locally, and that'll make you, at least your mental health will be a little bit better. So I have a YouTube channel, The Peer Review. The URL is thepeer.review. So check it out. And I like to do primary source kind of stuff here. So I've been, the SCOTUS oral arguments and all this kind of stuff has kind of been my side hobby. So this has been fun to talk about it with you guys.
You've been around enough. You've seen what we do. Sort of the format and how we do different shows. You've now been on After Dark and on In Time, slightly different formats, different things. But I think you get a sense for what we do. So you are always welcome
Thank
back.
You.
So if you want to discuss this further, or if you see something in the news, because you reached out to me, you're like, oh, you're doing this, I want in. So you're always welcome. You're always welcome. And if it's something that you didn't see the link, we're still probably doing it. You have some idea of how we operate. So you're always welcome. Thank you for coming. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Don't ever hesitate to hit me up. Is Andring, any final thoughts?
I'd like to
Bastard.
expand a bit.
Sorry. I'm sorry. That was a deep. Sorry, I was.
Is my mic on?
Telling myself just wait till he's made the argument. Wait till he's made the argument, and then call him that, regardless of what he says. I don't really care what you say, but anyways, apologies. Yeah. All right.
Well, yeah, I can be a bastard. So,
let's. To be fair, one of the sad things is. You and I have talked about this, but I do want to get this out. You and I have talked about this before. There are times I'm really kind of ashamed of liberals and some of the arguments that end up getting used. You do get a very. It's not just the evil conservatives or misrepresenting arguments and just doing it. So it's like some of the shit that you get is just like, it's like, could you listen to his argument and then call him a bastard? And preferably only if it really is what it deserves. Anyways, you get far more shit than you should. Anyway, so that was the last interruption. Please continue.
Yes, any final thoughts? Oh, and by the way, I'm going to interrupt your final thoughts.
Well, now I'm not going to interrupt him anymore. I'm just going to mute you.
Yeah. I was going to extend upon what Greg had said. When you try, one, there's kind of a quaint little throwaway line that's actually pretty impactful, which is be the change you wish to see in the world. And secondly, when you try to change vast, huge, complex systems that have taken centuries to evolve to the points that they're at, and you try and take that approach from top down, change everything, is vastly complicated. Anybody who tells you that solutions are simple are lying to you, and they're trying to propagandize you. None of this is simple. It's vastly complicated. On the other hand, it's much more simple to make changes locally because you have a better grasp of what's going on. There's fewer players involved, and you generally have to face all of these people, or these people have to face you in your local environment. But it requires more work on your part because you actually have to go out and do things. You have to get involved. You have to want to step up and take responsibility and join the board, advocate for the changes that you want to see. So it requires you to take on yourself a hell of a lot more personal responsibility. However, it's simpler to affect change at that level. And I think that we've got way too many people in the country that want somebody else to fix the problem. It's a problem. It needs to be fixed, and it should be fixed this way, and you need to go get it and get it fixed. We've abdicated our responsibilities to manage ourselves. And that really starts with your local community and building from there. If you try and take control of the top and change everything top down, you're going to find that it's incredibly difficult, unwieldy, and you'll probably fail. So, keep that in mind and go out and be the change you want to see in the world.
Well said. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Xandering, for coming on. Yeah, I'm glad we finally had a chance to. I've been running around all day. It's been insanely it's been trying. It's been a busy day, but so we didn't get a chance to chat. I'm glad we managed to do this after dark. Thank you all for sticking with us this long. Like, subscribe, and share if you like our content. If you like any of the videos we've done in the past, sharing is a great way to help us out. Doesn't cost you a thing. And if you like the show, send it to a friend. If you don't like the show, send it to someone you don't like. But now we've dropped the link for Greg, the peer review. The YouTube channel for that has been dropped, so go check that out. If you want to have more of these discussions, please feel free to join us on the Discord. I don't know, Xandering, if you're planning on going to the Discord. I know there was some interest in chatting with you there. I'm not going to be able to make it tonight, but do you? Oh, it's getting awfully late for you too. I know you're going to have to. Were you thinking of either of you? Greg, Xandering, were you guys planning on maybe stopping in on the Discord and saying hi and chatting with anyone in the audience, or
possibly, yeah.
I have to say possibly as well. Let me go poop because everybody needs to know I need to go poop and have for like the last hour. But it is getting late. I do have to get moving. I'm under a bad time crunch because I have a permitted load. It's oversized. So the 4th of July is coming up.
And that's why you're going to
I thought that was the toilet information. Wait. I was like,
it's not. He's a truck driver. He didn't mean, but Yeah. All right.
So I'm under time crunch, so it's not like and every time I get sucked in and start talking to people, the next thing I know, I mean, this happens a lot. It's like, I've really only got 5 minutes. I got to go pick my daughters up. An hour later, I'm trying to explain to my daughters why I'm not there to pick them up because you won't shut up. Time gets away from me, and next thing I know, it's like 2 a.m. and I'm like, crap, I've got to be up in like 2 hours to go drive. So
That's rough.
Don't do that.
I will go poop, and I will evaluate while on the throne because that's where all the best thinking is done. Everybody knows this. And then if you see me, you see me. If you don't, I decided that it's probably a better use of my time to sleep so that I can, drive this 81,000-pound rig down the road safely tomorrow.
Dang.
Welcome everyone to After Dark. All right. Perfect. Well, and then I'm sure if anybody wants to hit up his Andring, hit him up on the Discord, or hit me up and we can chat. I'm usually pretty available myself. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to be having a discussion tomorrow, 9:30 Eastern Standard, with Commander Lance McMillan. For those of you who don't know who he is, he was the head of staging for the Iraq War out of CENTCOM for the 5th Fleet.
Wow.
He really knows his shit, and he's made a tremendous number of predictions regarding what's going to happen in Ukraine, and so far he is right far more often than not. It's things are getting pretty desperate over there, so we're going to have him back. He's going to fill us in on what's going on, what this situation looks like both strategically and tactically, and the shows with him. He's also got a great sense of humor. It's always a lot of fun, but he has forgotten more about war, combat, and that whole 9 yards than probably all the entire audience put together ever knew. The guy's insane. So tomorrow, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. I hope you guys will join us for that. And SCOTUS is still releasing decisions, so I'll probably see you in 15 minutes at the rate at which they're dropping shit.
Retired.
Breaking news.
Strike when the iron's hot.
They can't.
Yeah, strike while. That's right. Yeah, because he submitted the letter. He said effective 24 hours. Can they not drop anything else?
I thought she's sworn.
Are they
she's sworn in today.
Okay.
It's usually Fridays. No, you're right. It's usually Fridays that they dump the big ones, but now because of Breyer's.
Yeah, we've got to. Okay, we really. Okay, phrasing. Just phrasing. This show has just. Okay.
That was close. I was like, really? That's so much to do.
I'm gonna take the big dump too. So
Yeah. Well, so did Trump. That was the. Oh my God, with him talking about the elections, like he really just can't get off the toilet, can he? Okay. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow, probably in about 24 hours, but who the hell knows, given what's been going on. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow. Good night. All right.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
It was an After Dark.
Oh, so thank you.
How we
yeah.
had to throw some cooking into it.
I think that's the.
I would never
is
do
definitely
something like
the place
that
to
on